Chapter 7:18. My name is Shuei, old madam's second-class servant girl. Hearing Xiao Wanru's question, Shuei hurriedly answered. What did Nanny Shi say to old madam just now? Why did old madam suddenly ask Nanny Shi to live in the Piaoyun courtyard? Xiao Wanru looked at her and asked slowly. When she left just now, she was sure that neither old madam nor Nanny Shi thought of her at that time. Unexpectedly, in the blink of an eye, the two of them thought of her. I don't know. I was in the courtyard just now. Shuei lowered her head and said. Xiao Wanru stopped talking and just looked at Shuei, which made the atmosphere in the room freeze. After a long while, Xiao Wanru waved her hand and said, Go ahead. Just tell them that I have an etiquette instructor here and old madam doesn't have to worry about it. Fifth miss. Shuei seemed to want to persuade her, but Xiao Wanru had closed her eyes slightly, as if she didn't want to talk anymore. Seeing Xiao Wanru's look, Shuei bowed to her sensibly and left. Miss, old madam won't give up. After Shuei left, Yuji said, If old madam dared to resist old madam's decision like this, wouldn't it be a slap in old madam's face in front of Nanny Shi? Go and ask Nanny Zheng to come here. Xiao Wanru shook her head unhurriedly and said, Yes, I'll go now. Yuji answered. She didn't dare to hesitate and left. Nanny Zheng rarely appeared in front of others. She usually embroidered in the wing room and helped Xiao Wanru deal with some affairs in the courtyard. When Xiao Wanru was not around, she secretly arranged Xiao Wanru's servants and paid more attention to the new servant girls and old maids in the courtyard. Everyone in the Piaoyun courtyard knew Nanny Zheng, but other people in Duke Xing's mansion didn't even know that there was such a nanny. On the surface, the supervisor nanny of the Piaoyun courtyard was Nanny Yu. The servants in the courtyard also had their own guesses about Nanny Zheng's identity. Most of them thought that Nanny Zheng was the fifth Miss's henchman, but she was not as useful as Nanny Yu, so she only helped fifth Miss with some affairs and usually embroidered in the wing room. Miss, has an etiquette instructor from the Imperial Palace come here? Nanny Zheng came quickly and asked as soon as she came in. On the way here, Yuji had already briefly told her about this matter. Xiao Wanru stood up to greet him, and then the two of them sat down respectively. Yes, Nanny Zheng. Have you heard of Nanny Shi? Xiao Wanru nodded and asked. A servant of the Empress. Nanny Zheng thought for a while and said with certainty. She is a servant of the Empress. There are 4 people in our mansion participating in the consort selection this time. The Empress specially sent a nanny here, and she is very unkind to me. Just now, in old madam's place, she repeatedly provoked me, saying that I was observing mourning for my parents and shouldn't participate in the consort selection. Xiao Wanru told her what had happened in old madam's courtyard before, including what Xiao Yinru had said to her at the gate of the courtyard. After hearing Xiao Wanru's words, Nanny Zheng pondered for a moment and said, I think old madam must have reached an agreement with Nanny Shi. What agreement? I don't think so. Xiao Wanru's eyes flickered. In fact, she also thought so, but there were still some key points that she didn't figure out. The Empress must have taken a fancy to the background of Duke Xing's mansion and wanted to choose a miss of Duke Xing's mansion for her son. The first miss is most likely to be the one. Nanny Zheng had been in Duke Xing's mansion for a period of time. In fact, she had secretly investigated a lot of things, and she had helped Xiao Wanru come to some conclusions. At present, she summed up the conclusion based on the previous information. Since the first miss wants to marry into Prince Zhou's mansion, you naturally can't marry into any prince's mansion. The royal family will not allow 2 sisters to marry into 2 mansions and be consorts at the same time. What's more, there are so few princes. Nanny Zheng became more and more certain. Xiao Wanru could understand her words. There were only 4 princes in the emperor's mansion, including Chu Luchen, who he raised as his son and ranked with his son. The consort selection had a high status. At most, there would be 1 consort, 2 consorts, or even only 1 consort. If there were 2 consorts in Duke Xing's mansion at once, what would the other officials think? In her last life, Xiao Wanru had heard a lot about the balance of power in the Imperial Palace. Whether it was the previous Imperial Court or the Imperial Harem, they all paid attention to the balance of power, which meant that if one of her and Xiao Yinru was selected, the other could not be selected as a consort, unless there were special circumstances. The Empress and Old Madam were so determined to cooperate with each other so that she could not be selected as a consort. Perhaps with Guh and Great Elder Princess's strength, she might have a place among the consorts. They are worried, so they want to get rid of the hidden danger as soon as possible. Xiao Wanru connected the dots and thought for a long time, with her watery eyes narrowed. They do think so. After entering the consort selection, they can't make the decision. Even if the Empress wants to help, she has to consider Ri and Great Elder Princess's opinion. If this matter is brought to the Empress Dowager, it will be even more difficult to deal with. Nanny Jing said, "What if I insist on participating in the consort selection?" Xiao Wanru said slowly. If Miss insists on participating in the consort selection, they will definitely take action unless Miss takes the initiative to withdraw. Given Nanny Shi's character, she will definitely come up to show her strength to shock you first, and then hint to you with good words. It would be best if Miss can listen to her and take the initiative not to participate in the consort selection. But if Miss doesn't listen to her, Nanny Shi must have a backup plan. At that time, Miss will be forced to withdraw from the consort selection. Nanny Zheng also sorted out her thoughts and said, she really knew what kind of person Nanny Shi was. When they were in the Imperial Palace that day, although they didn't have much interaction, she could see Nanny Shi's character from some small things. What should we do now? Xiao Wanru's eyelashes fluttered twice and she asked. Of course, she couldn't fight against Old Madam with her current strength, let alone the Empress in the Imperial Palace. Chu Luchen had already told her that it was imperative for her to participate in the consort selection this time. Miss, rest assured. I know this Nanny Shi. She will definitely come over later, and I will deal with her first. Nanny Jing suggested. Her suggestion made Xiao Wanru feel relieved. Since Nanny Jing took the initiative to make such a proposal, it could be seen that she had some confidence. Are you sure that you won't let her live in the Piaoyun courtyard? Although Xiao Wanru was confident, she still asked cautiously. I won't let her live in the Piaoyun courtyard. Nanny Jing said with certainty, but then she reminded Xiao Wanru, but I'm afraid that she will also cause some trouble in the mansion in the future. After all, she has the Empress behind her. Then get her out of the mansion, Xiao Wanru said with a sneer. As soon as Nanny Shi entered the mansion, she had reached out her hand to Xiao Wanru. She was either a friend or an enemy. Xiao Wanru would never show mercy to her enemies. She had also set up the chess pieces of Madame of Duke Xing long ago. She had guessed that the person sent by the Empress would probably not get along well with her. She didn't believe that the Empress would be shameless enough to send another etiquette instructor here if an etiquette instructor had to leave Duke Xing's mansion. As the etiquette instructor of the beauties, she should teach them the rules and etiquette of the beauties. If she couldn't even do it herself, there was no need to talk about others. I heard that the Empress and Old Madam are distant relatives, and honored consort Shu in the Imperial Palace is also a relative of Madame of Duke Xing. Nanny, do you know about it? Xiao Wanru had asked Nanny Zheng about honored consort Shu before, but she had been delayed by Wang Yishu's matter, so she didn't pay much attention to it. At this time, she thought of it. The Empress is indeed a distant relative of Old Madam, but they are very distant and have been separated from each other for a long time. It can be said that they are of the same clan. Old Madam said that they are distant relatives, but the Empress actually doesn't recognize them. As for honored consort Shu and Madame of Duke Xing, they are distant, but honored consort Shu will visit Duke Xing's mansion and recognize them. Nanny Zheng thought for a while and made their relationship clear in a few words. Given the Empress's identity, she really didn't care about a distant relative, but the Emperor wouldn't mind if Duke Xing's mansion was willing to lean on her. The stronger Prince Zhou was, the better. Honored consort Shu had no children, so it would be beneficial for her to have a relationship with Duke Xing's mansion, which was also the reason why she would visit Duke Xing's mansion. Whether she recognized them or not, it was actually just a matter of the benefits. It was just as Xiao Wanru had guessed. She slightly raised the corners of her mouth with a sweet but cold smile. Her originally coquettish lips looked a little colder because of this coldness. She had made arrangements early. Next, it would depend on how many waves of attacks Nanny she could take before she was forced to leave the mansion. How dare she refuse? After hearing Shui's report, old madam almost couldn't breathe. Her lips trembled a few times, and she almost couldn't believe what she had heard. Seeing that the situation was not good, Nanny Yu hurriedly came over and knocked on her back a few times to help her breathe. She's really going too far. Nanny Shi was even more angry. She slapped the table heavily with her hand and said with a livid face. Not to mention outside the Imperial Palace, even in the Imperial Palace, few people dared to say such disdainful words to her. She was the etiquette instructor sent by the Empress. How arrogant was the 5th Miss Xiao to dare to say such words? She couldn't bear it. Nanny Shi took a deep breath, suppressed the anger in her heart, and said, "Old madam, since I'm the etiquette instructor of the 5th Miss Xiao, I should teach her improper behavior. Since the 5th Miss Xiao's words and deeds are abnormal now, I should ask old madam to teach the 5th Miss Xiao a good lesson." Xiao Wanru, who was supposed to succeed, actually failed in front of her. She also felt ashamed. "You can go now," old madam said with difficulty and kept panting. It could be seen that she was really angry. Nanny Yu didn't dare to speak and just kept knocking on her back gently, for fear that she would really faint out of anger. After hearing old madam's words, Nanny Shi stood up and went to the Piaoyun courtyard angrily with 2 palace maids beside her and an old maid leading the way. She didn't believe that she couldn't teach a little girl a lesson. When she arrived at the Piaoyun courtyard, she put on airs and went to the main room without waiting for the servants to report. When she reached the door, she said coldly, "5th Miss Xiao, I'm here to teach the 5th Miss Xiao at the Empress's order." After that, she lifted the curtain and walked in impudently. As soon as she stood still, she saw a woman opposite her turn around. When their eyes met, she was so shocked that she took a step back. Chapter 719. Remember in 1 second, 800 mail sign /say, net. Nanny Zheng looked at Nanny Shi with cold eyes. "You're not that?" Nanny Shi stammered and pointed at Nanny Zheng in astonishment. "You're not that?" Nanny Shi stammered, pointed at Nanny Zheng in astonishment, and said. Such behavior was very rude. If someone was found pointing at others in the Imperial Palace, they would be driven out of the Imperial Palace or beaten with sticks. It could be seen that Nanny Shi was so shocked that she lost her composure. "I'm that etiquette instructor, and I've been with my miss for several years." Nanny Zheng looked at Nanny Shi calmly, as if she didn't notice her extremely rude behavior. Weren't you driven out of the Imperial Palace?" Nanny Shi gasped, put down her hand, looked Nanny Zheng up and down, and said in disbelief. She got the news from the Empress that she had been driven out of the Imperial Palace, but she didn't expect to see her in the 5th Miss Xiao's place. How could she not panic? She was indeed driven out of the Imperial Palace. It happened that the Qin's mansion lacked etiquette instructors, and I followed Miss at that time. Now I've been teaching her for many years. Contrary to Nanny Shi's expression, Nanny Zheng looked very calm, as if she didn't hear the hidden meaning in Nanny Shi's words. Being driven out of the Imperial Palace was not only a shameful thing, but also a sign of falling out of favor. Of course, it could also be considered that her former master was incompetent and couldn't protect the people around her. "Nanny Shi, it's the Empress's order that you come here today. Let's educate our miss together." This time, Nanny Zheng didn't wait for Nanny Shi to say anything and suggested with a smile. Xiao Wanru's eyes fell on Nanny Shi's face, who looked very hesitant and unwilling. "I'm following the Empress's order." Nanny Shi pulled herself together and calmed down at this time. She looked at Nanny Zheng with her face darkening and said, "The Empress wants me to educate the 5th Miss alone." "Why does the Empress want you to educate the 5th Miss alone?" Nanny Zheng didn't get angry because of Nanny Shi's blunt refusal, but asked lightly. "Of course, it's because the 5th Miss is going to attend the consort selection. Shouldn't she be educated carefully? There are many noble people in the Imperial Palace, and it's not good to offend any of them. The Empress means well. If it weren't for the deep relationship between Duke Xing's mansion and the Empress wouldn't have bothered to teach her." Nanny Shi said. Xiao Wanru raised the corners of her mouth slightly. Nanny Shi's words were much softer than before, and she was not as arrogant as she had been in front of old madam. "Since I followed my former master, even the Empress has praised my upbringing." Nanny Shi, are you suspecting that my upbringing is not good enough? Does our master need to be educated by Nanny Shi again? Nanny Zheng said with a faint smile. Nanny Shi choked and subconsciously didn't dare to answer directly. She could be regarded as the Empress's henchman, so she knew something about the Empress. If there was anyone in the Imperial Palace that the Empress was afraid of, it would be Nanny Zheng's former master. Nanny Zheng was a low-key person. Although she had a title in the Imperial Palace, she was almost invisible. None of the new concubines would take her seriously. No one could see the so-called favor, not even her shadow, so there was nothing to be jealous of. In fact, not only the new concubines, but also the old concubines didn't care about the person in the Imperial Palace. But in fact, the person in the Imperial Palace was the one that the Empress cared about the most. Since the Empress cared about the person, the Empress's henchmen naturally also paid some attention to her. Of course, they also knew that they had to be very careful when dealing with the Empress in case they found out something wrong. Speaking of which, Nanny Zheng in front of them was sent out of the Imperial Palace when the Empress made a profit. But she was just sent out of the Imperial Palace. Even though the Empress wanted to punish her, she didn't dare to intervene, for fear of provoking the Emperor. Therefore, most of the palace maids who were driven out of the Imperial Palace didn't end up well. However, although Nanny Zheng was driven out of the Imperial Palace, she got the title of etiquette instructor. In fact, she was just the principal palace maid of the Empress. But even so, Nanny Shi didn't dare to say that she didn't teach her well, not only because the Empress did praise her, but also because Nanny Shi was worried that she would become the second Nanny Zheng. Moreover, she could be sure that if she made such a mistake, she would not only be driven out of the Imperial Palace but also be beaten to death. It was very likely that not only she but also her relatives would be implicated. Thinking of this, Nanny Shi didn't dare to argue with Nanny Zheng out of spite. Nanny Zheng's master had protected her back then, but the Empress might not necessarily protect her. If Nanny Shi thinks it's inappropriate, you can go back to the Imperial Palace and ask the Empress. Nanny Zheng didn't force Nanny Shi to answer directly. Nanny Shi's face darkened, and she nodded righteously and said, "This kind of thing should be reported to the Empress and let the Empress make the decision." It was not an exaggeration to say that she and Nanny Zheng were old enemies. They served different masters and had fought against each other in secret many times. After saying that, Nanny Shi glanced at Xiao Wanru, who was standing behind Nanny Zheng, and looked her up and down again. She didn't understand what was so good about the fifth Miss Xiao that she could win the favor of that person. Or was it really just a coincidence that Xiao Wanru accidentally hired Nanny Zheng as her etiquette instructor and taught her for 3 years? Xiao Wanru looked at Nanny Shi calmly with clear ripples in her watery eyes. Then she smiled slightly and fluttered her long eyelashes, which made her look more outstanding and charming. But at the same time, she was still dignified and decent and didn't seem to be flustered by her gaze at all. Even in the Imperial Palace, as the Empress's henchman, no one dared to look back when she looked at them. However, the fifth Miss Xiao, who had not reached the marriageable age, looked at her gracefully, as if she really didn't know anything. It seemed that she didn't know anything about it. After thinking it through, Nanny Shi turned around and left. She really couldn't make the decision. Seeing Nanny Shi turn around and leave, the servants she brought with her immediately followed her and returned to old Madam's courtyard. "Nanny Zheng, will she come back again?" Xiao Wanru blinked her eyes, looked at Nanny Shi and the others, who were in a hurry as when they came, and smiled slightly. Standing by the window, she could see clearly that Nanny Shi was almost in a panic at this time. Nanny Zheng also walked to the window and stood behind Xiao Wanru. Seeing the backs of Nanny Shi and the others, she smiled slightly and said, "She will come back, but she won't be too harsh on you in public." How could the Empress shrink back so easily? Moreover, the first miss of Duke Xing's mansion should be the one she liked, so she wouldn't let go of her. Given the Empress's character, she would take action once she liked someone. If there was a good one, she would definitely give it to Prince Zhou so that Prince Zhou could have some capital. The Empress had been thinking about that position for a long time. Then let her come. Xiao Wanru nodded and looked at the gate of the courtyard thoughtfully. At this moment, Nanny Shi and the others had disappeared. She was really not afraid that Nanny Shi would come back. She had failed again and again. Moreover, she had prepared something else for Nanny Shi. In the main room, old madam had calmed down. She took a sip of tea and was thinking about something with a gloomy face. Suddenly, she heard a voice coming from the door. She looked up and saw Nanny Shi rushing in angrily. She was stunned for a moment. Nanny Shi shouldn't make trouble for Xiao Wanru in the Piaoyun courtyard at this time. Nanny Shi was backed by the Empress, so Xiao Wanru couldn't refuse her even if she was unwilling. Even if Great Elder Princess brought this matter up, she couldn't do anything about it. How could Great Elder Princess dare to refuse the Empress's kindness? After so many fights, old madam was very satisfied that she finally gained the upper hand. Unexpectedly, Nanny Shi came back in anger not long after leaving. It seemed that it was not a good thing. Old madam, since the fifth miss of your mansion has an etiquette instructor, why do you play us like monkeys and keep the Empress in the dark? As soon as Nanny Shi entered the room, her face darkened. How could she not be angry? She rushed to the Piaoyun courtyard with a large group of people. Originally, she wanted to suppress Xiao Wanru, but she didn't expect that she not only failed to do so, but also had to come back in disgrace. Nanny Shi couldn't swallow her anger. It was stuck in her throat, which made her feel very uncomfortable. What do you mean, Nanny Shi? Our mansion has never done such a thing. Old madam's face darkened. Although she didn't understand what had happened to Nanny Shi, she didn't allow her to talk nonsense. After all, Nanny Shi was old madam of Duke Xing's mansion. Although Nanny Shi was the Empress's servant, she had to show her respect. After being scolded by old madam, Nanny Shi took a deep breath and suppressed the rolling anger in her heart. However, her face still darkened and she said, "Why didn't old madam tell me that the fifth miss has an etiquette instructor who has been teaching her for several years?" If old madam had told her clearly just now, at least she would have gone there after thinking about it, and she wouldn't have been at a disadvantage when she suddenly met Nanny Zheng and let Nanny Zheng take the initiative. When did Xiao Wanru have an etiquette instructor? She has been cultivating on the mountain. How could she have hired an etiquette instructor? Old madam said in astonishment. Old madam, it turns out that you don't know it either. It seems that old madam really doesn't care about this granddaughter as much as the rumors say. Nanny Shi couldn't help but sneer. Your granddaughter has an etiquette instructor who should have been hired when she was in the Qin's mansion 3 years ago. Since then, she has been with her. Maybe she didn't live in the mansion before, so old madam doesn't know it. The sarcasm in Nanny Shi's words was very obvious. Old madam was angry and annoyed when she heard it, so she turned to look at Nanny Yu. Nanny Yu thought for a while and shook her head, indicating that she didn't know it either. Since old madam doesn't know it, let's leave it at that for the time being. I'll go back to the Imperial Palace to report it to our Empress first. We have to let our Empress know about it. The identity of this etiquette instructor is not simple. Even if I met her in the Imperial Palace before, I had to be very polite to her. Nanny Shi said sarcastically. She was the Empress's servant. Even if they hadn't met formally, they had met each other secretly. Nanny Zheng should have met each other as well. Otherwise, they wouldn't have recognized each other as soon as they met. What a coincidence! Chapter 720. After saying that, Nanny Shi turned around and left, followed closely by the 2 palace maids, leaving the people of Duke Xing's mansion looking at her back in astonishment. Then they looked at old madam, who was sitting in the middle with a stiff face, and lowered their heads silently. Everyone could see that old madam was about to explode with anger, and her face was twisted. Old madam, calm down. Nanny Shi didn't make it clear. Nanny Yu advised cautiously. Old madam swung her hand, and the teacup on the table immediately fell to the ground. The tea and porcelain fragments were scattered all over the ground, and it was a mess. Let's go and see who the great etiquette instructor is, old madam said with trembling fingers. After saying that, she struggled to stand up. Old madam, don't be angry. It's useless for you to go there at this time. If there is no such person, Nanny Shi will misunderstand. It's not appropriate for you to go there like this. If there is such a person, even Nanny Shi has come back. What's the point of you going there like this? Nanny Yu was anxious and reached out to help old madam. If she really rushed there regardless of anything, it would really be a big deal. When Nanny Yu's words reached the key point, old Madam breathed heavily a few times and finally calmed down. She held Nanny Yu's hand and sat down heavily. It was indeed irrational to go there at this time when they didn't know anything. After sitting down, old Madam said in a deep voice after a long while, "Go and find out about this etiquette instructor." "Yes, I'll go now." "Old Madam, calm down." Nanny Yu nodded and comforted old Madam in a soft voice. When Nanny She was here, old Madam was more pretentious, but now she was really angry. Old Madam was not in good health. If something really happened to her, no one could bear the responsibility. Don't go there empty-handed. Send the bracelets given by the Empress. Old Madam also knew that she was in poor health, so she tried hard to calm down and said, "Nanny She came to educate the misses of Duke Xing's mansion," which showed that the Empress thought highly of Duke Xing's mansion. In order to show her favor, the Empress even asked Nanny She to bring 4 pairs of bracelets here to reward the misses who entered the palace for the consort selection. After Nanny She came here, she just wanted to show her power and didn't think of giving rewards to others first, so she put the rewards in old Madam's place. At this time, it could be used as an excuse for Nanny Yu to go there. Hearing old Madam's words, Nanny Yu also knew that old Madam had really calmed down. She secretly breathed a sigh of relief and repeatedly agreed. She found a maid and took a pair of bracelets to the Piaoyun courtyard. Nanny Yu also wondered why Xiao Wanru had an etiquette instructor around her. It had been a while since the 5th Miss returned to the mansion and she had been to the Piaoyun courtyard a lot. Why didn't she find an etiquette instructor who could subdue Nanny She? It was very quiet in the Piaoyun courtyard, as if nothing had happened to Nanny She just now. Most of the servants didn't know that the arrogant old maid turned out to be the confidant of the Empress. They all thought that she was just a supervisor nanny of some mansion and might have something to discuss with the 5th Mississippi. However, seeing that she went back with a pale face in anger, they knew that this person had fallen in the end. At this moment, when they saw Nanny Yu coming over, they were all shocked. Hearing that Nanny Yu had come over, Xiao Wanru asked Yu Jie to come out and politely invited Nanny Yu in. When Nanny Yu got inside, she saw Xiao Wanru sitting there with a calm face and embroidering a sachet. "5th Miss, I'm here to give you a pair of bracelets. The Empress asked Nanny She to bring them here as a reward for you." Nanny Yu came up and bowed to her with a smile. Xiao Wanru asked Yu Jie to hold her, put down the sachet in her hand, and said with a smile, "Nanny Yu, you're too polite. Thank you for coming here." "Don't say that. It's what I should do," Nanny Yu said as she looked around. There were only Xiao Wanru, Yu Jie, and her maid in the room. The others were not in the room. It was quiet, and it didn't seem that they had a conflict with Nanny She just now. The servant girl brought the jade bracelets, and Xiao Wanru stood up and took them respectfully. Her Majesty's intention is naturally that the young ladies in our fu are all good, so she bestowed her favor and sent one of her mammy over, mainly to teach the young ladies the daily etiquette. Entering the palace is not the same as in the fu. If there is a slight mistake, it may cause trouble to one's life. Nanny Yu said with a smile, while talking about the Empress's kindness calmly. "The Empress is really considerate," Xiao Wanru said softly. Xiao Wanru said softly, but this kindness was not for herself, but for the whole Duke Xing's mansion. Just now, Nanny She said that she saw an etiquette instructor here. Old Madam said that she didn't know about it, so I don't know whether it's true or not. Nanny Yu changed the topic with a smile. "Nanny Yu, are you talking about Nanny Zheng?" Xiao Wanru didn't hide it. She tilted her head slightly, thought for a while, and asked with a smile. "Nanny Zheng? I remember that the supervisor nanny in charge of this courtyard is not the wet nurse of the 5th Mississippi. It seems to be surnamed Yu. Nanny Yu, right?" Nanny Yu thought for a while and pretended that she had thought about it for a long time, as if she had really never cared about the Piaoyun courtyard. The supervisor nanny in charge of the Piaoyun courtyard is indeed Nanny Yu. Xiao Wanru nodded and confirmed it. "Then this Nanny Zheng is my etiquette instructor. Old Madam Qin chose her for me when I was in the Qin's mansion. At that time, she happened to come out of the Imperial palace and said that she was very well behaved. Old Madam Qin thought that the 1st Miss Qin and I didn't know the etiquette when we first arrived in the capital city. She was afraid that we would offend others, so she specially hired someone to teach us. Later, because I suddenly recognized my ancestors and went to the mountain to cultivate in seclusion, she entrusted Nanny Zheng to my maternal grandma. My maternal grandma also thought that Nanny Zheng was good, so she came to Duke Xing's mansion recently. Xiao Wanru's eyes flickered. Therefore, Nanny Zheng not only came from the Imperial Palace, but also got the approval of Ru and Great Elder Princess. It would not be easy for Old Madam to drive her away even if she wanted to. Old Madam had almost never won against Ru and Great Elder Princess. Can you let me meet this Nanny Zheng? Nanny Yu thought about it in her heart and showed a kind smile. Although she was a servant of Old Madam, she always had a kind of vague kindness to Xiao Wanru, so she didn't hate Nanny Zheng's words. Nanny Yu had an intuition that this Nanny Zheng was not simple. Seeing was believing, so she could see more clearly at that time. Since Xiao Wanru had pushed Nanny Zheng out, she naturally did not intend to let Nanny Zheng hide from others. She nodded to Yu Jie at once, and Yu Jie left. After a while, she brought Nanny Zheng in. Seeing that the woman who came in was only about 30 years old, Nanny Yu was stunned for a moment. In her imagination, since she was an etiquette instructor from the Imperial Palace, she should be at least 40 or 50 years old. How could she look so young and beautiful? She looked more like the competent chief palace maids of the masters in the Imperial Palace. Nanny Zheng came in and bowed to Xiao Wanru first. Then she obeyed Xiao Wanru and turned to Nanny Yu. After looking Nanny Yu up and down a few times, she asked, "Nanny Yu, do you want to see me?" Her expression and behavior were very calm, as if she didn't know that Nanny Yu in front of her was the most powerful person around Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion. After looking her up and down, Nanny Yu asked cautiously, "Are you Nanny Zheng from the Imperial Palace?" Nanny Zheng smiled faintly and nodded. "Since you are from the Imperial Palace, why have you followed the fifth miss for so many years? Even an etiquette instructor can't follow the miss being taught for so long, right?" Nanny Yu said in confusion. She had been following Old Madam for a long time, so she had some knowledge about etiquette instructors. Duke Xing's mansion had also hired etiquette instructors, and several misses had been taught by them for a period of time, especially the first miss, who had been taught by them for about a year, which was almost the longest. If Nanny Zheng had really followed the fifth miss from Qin's mansion, it would have been at least 3 years. If there were no special circumstances, how could she have followed the miss who had been taught her for 3 years? I was driven out of the Imperial Palace, so I am naturally different from ordinary etiquette instructors. I intend to follow the fifth miss all the time. Nanny Zheng did not avoid talking about her past and said, "Why were you driven out?" Nanny Yu's heart skipped a beat and she asked subconsciously. After asking, she felt that something was wrong. "Nanny Yu, do you really intend to know?" Nanny Zheng looked at Nanny Yu with a meaningful look, which made Nanny Yu's scalp tingle. The more one knew about the Imperial Palace, the faster one would die. Not to mention that she was just a servant, even those madams with honorary titles did not dare to inquire about the affairs in the Imperial Palace at will. "I didn't say anything just now." Nanny Yu lowered her head and did not dare to inquire more. She changed the topic and said, "Did Nanny Shi leave after meeting Nanny Zheng just now?" "If Nanny Shi leaves now, it may be true," Nanny Zheng said with a slight smile. Xiao Wanru watched Nanny Zheng deal with Nanny Yu calmly. She picked up the tea served by Yu Jie, took a sip, put it down, and continued to pick up her sachet to embroider. This sachet was a new task assigned by Nanny Zheng, so she had to finish it beautifully. She did not mind Nanny Yu asking about Nanny Zheng, nor did she mind Old Madam knowing about Nanny Zheng's existence. Since she no longer intended to hide Nanny Zheng, she would wait and see how she would deal with the situation. "Nanny Zheng, will you really follow the fifth miss all the time in the future?" Nanny Yu pulled herself together and tried to calm down. "Since the fifth miss has taken me in, I will follow the fifth miss," Nanny Zheng said without hesitation. Nanny Yu couldn't answer for a moment. She looked at Xiao Wanru and said with a dry smile, "Nanny Shi has returned to the Imperial Palace. I can't decide what to do next, but it depends on the Empress in the Imperial Palace. Old Madam is not in good health now, so I'll go back first." "Nanny Yu, please." Xiao Wanru put down the sachet in her hand and stood up. Fifth miss, I'm leaving. Seeing Xiao Wanru being so polite, Nanny Yu smiled a little more and said. Chapter 721. Concubine Land's Maid? The Empress asked with a crack on her dignified face. Yes, she is Concubine Land's maid. She was a chief palace maid who followed her before. 3 years ago, something happened and she was driven out. Nanny she knelt on the ground and reported in full detail. She lowered her head and did not dare to peep at the Empress's face. It became so quiet in the hall that Nanny she could almost hear her own breathing. Nanny she lowered her head more and more. After a long while, she heard the Empress's voice. Is she really Concubine Land's maid? I'm sure that she is Concubine Land's maid. Nanny she said. This time, there was another long silence. There was a sense of oppression in the silent atmosphere, which made Nanny she breathless. Why did Concubine Land's maid appear beside the fifth Miss Xiao of Duke Xing's mansion? Could it be that she has taken a fancy to her? The Empress seemed to be talking to herself, and she sounded calm. I don't think so. 3 years ago, that maid had to leave the Imperial Palace because of something. At that time, the Empress was fair, and even the Emperor couldn't say anything about it. Nanny she cautiously reminded her. The incident 3 years ago happened to be a fight between the Empress and Concubine Lan. It was indeed an accident, and this accident ended with the Empress's victory, driving Concubine Lan's trusted maid out of the Imperial Palace. The Empress fell silent again. Of course, she remembered this matter. There were many times when two people secretly competed against each other. How could she forget? 3 years ago, Xiao Wanru was only the second miss of Qin's mansion. She had just come from a remote place and had nothing to do with the capital city. In fact, it was impossible for her to have anything to do with Concubine Lan. The only thing she could have done was that when Chu Luchen went to Jiangzhou, it was said that he lived in Ning Yuan Army General's mansion in Jiangzhou. But he just lived there. At that time, Xiao Wanru was only 11 years old and didn't know anything. It was impossible for her to plot against such a young girl. Moreover, at that time, she was not favored by the Empress and had fallen out with the first miss of Qin's mansion in Jiangzhou. In any case, it was impossible for Concubine Lan to choose her. Was it really just an accident? She was a little uncertain. 3 years ago, I heard that the Empress Dowager intended to marry the fifth miss of Duke Xing's mansion to Prince Qin. Is it true? The Empress said. She said this very softly. She didn't want Nanny Shi to answer her. She was just talking to herself subconsciously. 3 years ago, she guessed so. She felt that the Empress Dowager's various behaviors were full of hints. She first summoned Xiao Wanru and then asked her to go to the side hall to rest. Prince Qin happened to be in the side hall. It seemed that the Empress Dowager wanted to set them up, but the Empress always felt very suspicious. Xiao Wanru was not an excellent candidate. Why did the Empress Dowager like her so much? The Empress was the daughter-in-law of the Empress Dowager, so she knew her biased mother-in-law very well. She had always known that the Empress Dowager wanted to find a powerful and noble daughter for Prince Qin, so that Prince Qin could enjoy prosperity after she died. Even if the new emperor didn't like him in the future, the new emperor couldn't do anything to him with the protection of the noble daughter's family. Although Xiao Wanru had a good identity and was backed by Ru and Great Elder Princess's mansion and Duke Xing's mansion, those who were familiar with the inside story knew that it was impossible for Duke Xing's mansion to support Xiao Wanru. Besides, Ru and Great Elder Princess's mansion was just an empty shell. Such a candidate was not the one the Empress Dowager liked the most. At that time, the Empress Dowager gave the jade pendant to Xiao Wanru, and it was most likely for her to have that intention, so she wanted to express her intention first. However, the Empress Dowager was not willing to let her marry Xiao Wanru. Just like this time, she would definitely choose another one secretly. As for the rumors that had been released, they were just the most intuitive guesses of some people based on the Empress Dowager's actions at that time, so they couldn't be taken seriously. Since it couldn't be true, Concubine Lan would not intervene. In this case, was it really just an accident that Concubine Lan's palace maid was driven out of the Imperial Palace? Go and check the records of her leaving the Imperial Palace at that time. Find out why she went to the Qin's mansion to be an etiquette instructor. Who asked her to go there? Or did she ask for it? After thinking for a while, the Empress gave an order to a principal palace maid who was close to her. Yes, Your Highness. I'll go and check it now. After the principal palace maid left in a hurry, the hall became quiet again. The Empress frowned and thought about it quietly. This matter was so unexpected that she had all kinds of guesses for a moment. However, after thinking about it carefully, she didn't know which one was true. It seemed that all of them were possible. Some were more likely to be true, while others were less likely to be true. Nanny, she knelt there with her head lowered and didn't dare to move. Even if she didn't look up, she knew that the Empress's face was very dark now. The news she brought was very important. One was sitting and the other was kneeling, and there were two palace maids standing beside the Empress, but they were all silent. Your Highness, Prince Zhou is here. A eunuch's sharp voice suddenly came from the door of the hall. Let him in. The Empress said coldly. The door of the hall was wide open, and Chu Liuzhou strode in. Seeing Nanny Shi kneeling on the ground, he just glanced at her and then continued to move forward. He walked up to the Empress, bowed to her, and asked with concern, Mother, do you feel uncomfortable? The Empress looked a little gloomy. It's okay. Sit down and talk. The Empress pointed to the chair beside her and said. Prince Zhou came over, lifted his robe, and sat down. Mother, do you have something on your mind? It's about the consort selection. The Empress didn't hide it. She reached out to rub between her eyebrows and said, looking quite tired. The consort selection hasn't started yet, has it? Mother, why are you so tired? If you're really tired, you can choose some other S to preside over the consort selection. Mother, you just need to take a look at the consort selection. Chu Liuzhou said casually. Zhou, tell me, do you want to marry the first miss of Duke Xing's mansion as your princess? The Empress shook her head and asked with a wry smile. As the master of the Imperial harem, she seemed to have infinite glory, but in fact, every step she took was difficult. Above her, there was not only the Emperor but also the Empress Dowager. Neither of them was easy to fool around with. What she hoped most now was her son. If her son could become the Empress Dowager, she wouldn't have to walk on thin ice like now. She can be a concubine. Chu Liuzhou thought for a while and said, in the beginning he did want to make Xiao Yanru his princess, but recently he had been very hesitant. Although Chu Qing saved Xiao Jie, he saw it on the spot, so how could he not know? The reason why he insisted with Chu Luiyue that it was Xiao Jie, who fell into the water, was that he was afraid that Xiao Yanru would really be a couple with Chu Qing. At first glance, he could tell that the son of the former emperor was a restless person. He had played so many tricks in front of the world. The descendants of the royal family had always been clever and meticulous. How could they be deceived by some coincidental appearances? Everything was just a trick. Furthermore, with this trick, Chu Qing really appeared in front of the world and became the son of the late emperor. At the same time, he also vaguely had the capital to compete with them. If he found a powerful wife, it would be disadvantageous to anyone. However, he still had his sympathy for Xiao Yanru. In Chu Liuzhou's opinion, Xiao Yanru's reputation had been tarnished. She and Chu Qing had pulled and hugged each other in front of him. At that time, there was a guard beside her who seemed to have helped to hold her up. However, no matter how he disliked Xiao Yanru, he couldn't push Xiao Yanru to Chu Liuyue's side. After thinking about it, he felt that he couldn't swallow the humiliation of marrying Xiao Yanru, who had a tarnished reputation, as if he had swallowed something dirty in his throat. However, he could still give her the position of a concubine. Duke Xing's mansion won't agree to let their eldest lineal daughter be a concubine. The Empress frowned and said unhappily. She had different ideas from Chu Liuzhou. Of course, she knew that Xiao Yanru had fallen into the water, but so what? Anyway, there was no news that Xiao Yanru had fallen into the water. Xiao Jie could take the blame for it. In this way, Xiao Yanru was still intact in front of others. The strength of Duke Xing's mansion really made her jealous. In front of me, you pulled and pulled other men, hugged each other with wet clothes, and even did the same with the guards. Duke Xing's mansion is not qualified to talk about the position of princess with me. Chu Liuzhou said disdainfully. With these conditions, as long as he proposed it, Duke Xing's mansion couldn't refuse. The Empress was not as optimistic as he thought. She still frowned and said, "What if Chu Luiwei gives her the position of the princess?" Chu Luiwei also saw her at that time. "If he doesn't want to be ashamed in front of me, he can only give her the position of a concubine," Chu Liuzhou said. The two of them were brothers and also competitors. Since they became governor, they had been in this kind of relationship, and they didn't give in to each other. When they saw Xiao Yanru fall into the water, they were together. It was also because they both hesitated at that time that Chu Qing took advantage of the loophole. Others didn't know that Chu Qing saved Xiao Yanru, but the two of them saw it with their own eyes. If she became his legal wife, she would definitely lose face in front of another person. No one was willing to lose face. Even if it was a fight for the throne, a prince also had his pride. Hearing what he said, the Empress fell silent for a moment and felt that it made sense. Even if you all give her the position of a concubine, you can't guarantee that the first miss of Duke Xing's mansion will marry into your Prince Zhou's mansion. The Empress pointed out a new question. "Mother, don't worry. We can talk about it after the beauties enter the palace. You are the host of the draft. If there is an accident or something happens at that time, who can say it clearly when there are many people?" Chu Liuzhou said with a meaningful smile. During the draft, the beauties would live in the palace for a period of time. There were many concubines in the palace, so it was indeed very easy for something to happen. The Empress nodded in agreement, but then she frowned and said, "I sent Nanny Shi to educate the first Miss Xiao before. I originally wanted to praise the first Miss Xiao on the surface and beat her in secret, but now there is some problem." "What problem?" Chu Liuzhou asked. The Empress's face darkened and she didn't speak for a while. After a long while, she said, "Since you plan to let Xiao Yanru marry into your Prince Zhou's mansion, Xiao Wanru, another miss of Duke Xing's mansion, can't be selected." "Mother, let her also be selected into Prince Zhou's mansion," Chu Liuzhou suddenly said. The Empress looked up in astonishment. Chapter 722. Selected for Prince Zhou's mansion? What are you thinking? How can there be two women selected for a prince's mansion? Moreover, they are both concubines. The Empress said with a cold face. Xiao Yanru was the noble eldest lineal daughter. Any mansion would try its best to cultivate such eldest lineal daughters. Xiao Wanru's identity was not weak. She was not only the eldest lineal daughter of the former heir of Duke Xing, but also the daughter of Infanta Qinghua. Her empty identity was even higher than Xiao Yanru's. Xiao Yanru was held hostage because of what had happened before. Even if she became a concubine in the prince's mansion, Duke Xing would bear it. However, Xiao Wanru couldn't do that. If Xiao Wanru became a concubine, Duke Xing would not be able to stand as her uncle. There had been a lot of rumors that Duke Xing's mansion did not treat the former heir well. There were even rumors that the former heir was killed by the current second branch of Duke Xing, so the title fell to the second branch. Now they were even more unwilling to let the eldest branch left by the former heir of Duke Xing have a promising future. His daughter, who had just left the eldest branch, had been in trouble frequently and even almost lost her life. Moreover, this matter had been brought to the Empress Dowager. At this time, even if Duke Xing was willing to send his niece to be a concubine, he could not really do so. If he really did so, would he still have the face to stand upright and speak in the future? Would he still be able to show his innocence in front of others? Moreover, the great elder princess would not let him go. "Mother, it doesn't matter if they both become concubines. In fact, my father didn't make it clear that two daughters of a mansion can't be concubines at the same time, but they can't both be concubines of the prince. If they become concubines and the situation is special, it will be a good thing," Chu Liuzhou said confidently. In this regard, he did inquire about it from the emperor indirectly, but the emperor didn't say anything, which gave him a new idea. Xiao Yanru was good, but Xiao Wanru seemed to be better. It was a pity to give up such a beauty. Even if she was just an empty identity, she was a noble and stunning beauty. "You actually asked your father about this?" The Empress flew into a rage. "Mother, I just happened to hear father talk about the consort selection, so I mentioned it." "Mother, don't worry. Father won't think that I really mean it. It was not me who mentioned the consort selection at that time. Seeing that the empress was angry, Chu Liuzhou hurriedly explained. Hearing his explanation, the anger on the empress's face slowly subsided. She warned, "Don't act rashly. Since you mentioned it to your father, whether you mentioned it or not, your father must have paid attention to it. It's fine if you don't do anything, but if you do something related to the two sisters, he won't let you off easily." Imperial mother, has Imperial father sensed my intentions? Chu Liuzhou said discontentedly, "She's just a concubine. The position of princess is at your command. It doesn't matter if there is one more concubine." Seeing that her son was still so stubborn, the empress was so angry that she stretched out her finger and pointed at Chu Liuzhou's forehead fiercely. "You don't make progress. You just like her because she is beautiful. When you have a stable position in the country in the future, you can get any beauty you want. Do you need to care about such an empty shelf?" Of course, this meant that she was against it. Of course, she was against Xiao Wanru marrying into Prince Zhou's mansion. It would be good if Xiao Yanru could marry into Prince Zhou's mansion. Originally, she had thought that Xiao Wanru would definitely be given the position of princess. Now Chu Liuzhou meant that Xiao Wanru would only be a concubine, so the position of princess could be properly operated. Thinking of this, the empress's mood became a little better. "Go and greet the Empress Dowager." She waved her hand and said, since he had entered the palace, he should go and greet the Empress Dowager. "Imperial Mother, I'll go now. It's my business," Chu Liuzhou said with dissatisfaction. He still wanted to ask the Empress to give him a solid answer. "Didn't you just say that you would talk about it after the women of the consort selection enter the palace? It's useless to say these now. Remember not to give yourself away in front of your father." The Empress waved her hand in exasperation at his failure to meet her expectations. Although he didn't get a definite answer from the Empress, at least the Empress didn't object at the beginning. Chu Liuzhou was satisfied. He stood up, bowed to the Empress, left, and went to the Empress Dowager's palace to greet her. As soon as he left, the palace maid who was sent to investigate the matter came back. "Your Majesty, I've checked it out." At that time, it was Duke Yong's mansion who invited Nanny Zheng to Qin's mansion. They invited Nanny Zheng to be an etiquette instructor. At that time, they didn't say who she would be taught by and only said that she would be sent to Qin's mansion. After that, the two nannies who were sent to Qin's mansion stayed in Qin's mansion. But when the fifth Miss Xiao returned to her family, the nanny who taught the first Miss of Qin's mansion asked to resign and left. The palace maid presented the file that she had just read. The Empress took it and looked through it. Since she was an etiquette instructor, she must have something to do with the Imperial Palace, especially Nanny Zheng. She used to have a high rank in the Imperial Palace, and there were also records of her case. When she turned to the page of Nanny Zheng, she saw what the palace maid had said just now. It seemed that it was really an accident. The Empress furrowed her brows again. After a long while, she said to Nanny Shi, who had been kneeling below, "You continue to go to Duke Xing's mansion and be an etiquette instructor for several misses in their mansion. As for the fifth Miss Xiao, since she wants to learn, of course, it's better for her to learn with her. Her etiquette instructor has been out of the palace for several years, and she doesn't know much about the situation in the palace as you do. You can explain the taboos in the palace while teaching her. She should be able to attend the class together with you." "What do you mean, Your Majesty?" Nanny She knelt so hard that her knees hurt, but she didn't dare to move. She just tried to figure out the meaning of the Empress's words. The Empress's words were much softer than when she went to Duke Xing's mansion. Last time, the Empress tried to suppress her, but this time, she tried to coax her. Nanny She couldn't figure out her master's meaning at the moment, so she asked carefully. "Go." The Empress didn't mean to explain to her. She waved her hand, leaned back, and directly drove her out. "Yes, Your Majesty." Nanny She walked out with her trembling knees. When she walked out of the hall, she carefully thought about what the Empress had said to her just now, as well as what the Empress and Prince Zhou had said, and suddenly felt that she understood. After the soreness in her knees disappeared, she hurriedly returned to Duke Xing's mansion with the two palace maids. "You want me to learn the rules with several sisters, because you want me to not only teach them etiquette, but also tell them some new taboos in the palace? Xiao Wanru thought for a while and understood what nanny she meant. The empress wanted her to learn the rules with them. No matter whether she had an etiquette instructor or not, Nanny Jing didn't know the new things in the palace. Nanny Shi took this as a starting point and asked her to attend the class and learn etiquette with them. In fact, it was not impossible. Go and tell the person sent by Nanny Shi that I will definitely go there tomorrow, Xiao Wanru said without raising her head, with all her attention on the sachet in her hand. Her embroidery was very exquisite. In her last life, after she married Wenqiqi, she had time to embroider slowly. Although Wenqiqi didn't know how to embroider, he was good at painting and had his own unique views on this kind of embroidery, so he could give Xiao Wanru some advice. Therefore, her embroidery was different from that of other women. The layout was more beautiful and picturesque. No matter how good other women's embroidery was, it was taught by other women, but her embroidery was taught by men, so some of the layout was more elegant and elegant. Just like the sachet in her hand, even though it was also embroidered with a cluster of flowers, it looked more elegant and natural, and she blended painting into embroidery. Miss, are you really going to go there? I can tell that Nanny Shi is not a good person at first glance. This time, she has been instructed by the Empress, so I don't know how to deal with you, Yujia said worriedly. She saw Nanny Shi embarrass her in old Madam's courtyard, and she was so angry that she almost couldn't bear it. It doesn't matter. Her attitude is much better now, Xiao Wanru said with a smile. Nanny Shi's words were much softer than before. It seemed that the Empress didn't ask her to be tough anymore. In this case, she would just wait and see. Otherwise, if something really happened, the Empress would definitely suspect her, who had a bad relationship with Nanny Shi at first glance. Is everything okay in the ancestral hall? Qing just told me that Nanny Sheng has been very busy these 2 days. She even asked someone to go out before. It seems that she has sent something to the Imperial Palace. Yujia answered. It was inconvenient for Qing to enter the room directly, so she asked Yujia to report it to her. She went to the Imperial Palace? Xiao Wanru said thoughtfully. Did she send a message to the Empress? Chu Lu was shocked and said anxiously, for fear that Madame of Duke Xing and the Empress would collude with each other to harm her master. Xiao Wanru shook her head and said, It's not the Empress. In the past, the Empress was not very close to Duke Xing's mansion. A distant relative was not enough for the Empress to treat them as relatives. Madame of Duke Xing and the Empress were not familiar with each other. In terms of familiarity, she was not as familiar as honored consort Shu, who was also a distant relative. She had a much closer relationship with Madame of Duke Xing and occasionally gave gifts to the Miss of Duke Xing's mansion. The two of them had schemed against her together before. What happened in the Imperial Palace last time was arranged by Duke Xing's mansion outside the Imperial Palace, while what happened in the Imperial Palace was arranged by honored consort Shu. Xiao Wanru had seen it clearly when it happened. She must have gone to find honored consort Shu, she said with a cold smile. She was not afraid that Madame of Duke Xing would go to find honored consort Shu, but she was afraid that Madame of Duke Xing would hesitate and not go to find honored consort Shu. Now, that piece of cloth was Madame of Duke Xing's favorite, which also gave her a backbone. She thought that Xiao Yanru wholeheartedly helped her and wanted to save her from the ancestral hall. Madame of Duke Xing also intended to save herself. She cooperated with Xiao Yanru from the inside and outside, and with honored consort Shu's help. Her matter was caused by the Imperial Palace. Although honored consort Shu was a little weak, if the Empress was involved, there was still a chance. Miss, do you still want to keep an eye on her? Continue to keep an eye on her. If there is anything unusual, ask Qing to report to me as soon as possible. Xiao Wanru said leisurely, rolling her watery eyes. The person who was locked up was the most impatient, even if this person was Madame of Duke Xing, who used to be dignified and looked extremely difficult to be fooled. Chapter 723. Madam, this is from honored consort Shu. Nanny Xing came in stealthily. After entering the door, she poked her head out and looked behind her. Finding that no one was following her, she reported in a low voice. She put down the food basket in her hand and took a deep breath. Then she opened the food basket and took out a small package from it. She had deliberately taken the dinner a little late before, sneaked to the back door once, and took out a small package in the name of her relative. There were only a few simple clothes in the package. She took the clothes one by one and shook them. Finally, a letter fell from the bottom of the clothes. Madame of Duke Xing took it eagerly, sat down on a chair beside her, opened the letter, and read it at a glance. When she finished reading, her face lit up with joy. She reached out and took out a small oiled paper package from a sewn hidden pocket of the clothes where the letter had fallen. After carefully opening it, there was some fine white powder inside. "Madam." Under the light, Nanny Xing's face turned pale, and her lips trembled twice. She had realized something. "This is a good way." Madame of Duke Xing's eyes fell on the white powder in front of her with a gloomy expression. "Madam, no." Nanny Xing grabbed her hand eagerly, looked at her, and shook her head hard. "I already have Ruer and even if I am slightly injured, so what?" Madame of Duke Xing's face flickered in the light, showing a bit of strange coldness. "Madam, no, let me do it." Nanny Xing's lips trembled a few times, and she finally said the words. "You." Madame of Duke Xing pondered. I'm High Duke's wet nurse. High Duke will still think of me. If something really happens to me, I'm afraid that Madam will have no one to command. In the future, in this empty ancestral hall, you won't even have someone to talk to." Nanny Xing cried. Madame of Duke Xing fell silent and looked at Nanny Xing, half scrutinizing and half thinking. In fact, she also thought of Nanny Xing, but she was afraid that Nanny Xing would not be willing. If Nanny Xing was not willing, there would be more changes after the incident, and Nanny Xing might even bite back. She was the High Duke's wet nurse. This identity was indeed enough, but the premise was that she stood on his side. If she stood on the opposite side of him, he would not have been afraid in the past, but now he could not. It was naturally a good thing that Nanny Xing could take the initiative to bring it up, but now she hesitated again. She was not afraid that Nanny Xing would lose her life. Honored Consort Shu would not really kill her. If Honored Consort Shu really wanted to kill her, with Nanny Xing around, this matter would also be traced to Honored Consort Shu. Even though Honored Consort Shu was a favored consort, she would not be able to bear the consequences if she secretly poisoned the madam of the honorary title of a prince, a duke, or a minister. But if Nanny Xing took this medicine, she would definitely be injured. If Nanny Xing was injured, she might be sent out of the ancestral hall. But before the matter was investigated clearly, she still had to stay in the ancestral hall. Without her trusted subordinate Nanny Xing, she would not be able to respond to the news outside, and she might make a wrong judgment. If she was injured, she could make the matter worse, and then she could also go out. "You don't have to do it. I'll do it. Remember what I told you before." Madame of Duke Xing shook her head, gritted her teeth with a gloomy face, and said, she had to be cruel to herself now. Nanny Xing let out a long sigh of relief. In fact, she was afraid that Madame of Duke Xing would really let her do it, but she knew Madame of Duke Xing's character well. If she did not take the initiative to ask, Madame of Duke Xing would definitely be suspicious of her. She had to say this, but she also pointed out that if she was really injured, no one would run errands for Madame of Duke Xing in the future. Now hearing Madame of Duke Xing's words, she secretly breathed a sigh of relief, only feeling a chill on her back, as if she had escaped from death. "Should I go to talk to First Miss about it now?" "If you go out often, you will be discovered. At that time, they will find out that Ru'er is involved, which is not good for either of us." Madame of Duke Xing shook her head. She was now locked up in the ancestral hall, and Nanny Xing was a conspicuous figure. Wherever she went, she would attract attention. If she was discovered, it would be more likely for her to be discovered. Ru'er must have forgiven her long ago. Otherwise, she would not have sent her favorite brocade over. Her daughter was smart, and she should have hinted that she would think of a way inside, and her daughter would cooperate outside. Thinking of her daughter's intelligence, Madame of Duke Xing closed her eyes and felt that it was the best way not to say it. She did not inform her daughter of anything, and only needed her daughter to help her secretly. There was no need to explain this kind of thing. It was also good for her daughter to leave the ancestral hall. Her daughter was going to attend the consort selection. If it was known that her mother was locked up in the ancestral hall, it would be bad for her. Madame of Duke Xing thought so, which explained the piece of brocade found at the door. She thought that it was Xiao Yinru's hint that she should find a way to leave here, which also meant that Xiao Yinru had forgiven her for her previous mistakes and would secretly cooperate with her. They were discussing in a low voice, but they did not notice that a figure flashed past the high window in the ancestral hall. Her landed on the ground, tidied up her clothes, and raised the corners of her mouth with a smile. With a bit of the simplicity of an inferior servant girl, she turned around and went to the Piaoyun courtyard. The medicine had been sent to Madame of Duke Xing. As early as when someone sent the package to the old maid at the back door, she had found the medicine in it according to Mrs. Instructions and changed it. Early in the morning, Nanny she asked someone to invite the 4 misses to the courtyard where she lived now to learn the rules. She did not live in Xiao Wanru's courtyard, but in a courtyard not far from the Piaoyun courtyard. This courtyard was neither too big nor too small, which was in line with her identity as an etiquette instructor sent by the Imperial Palace. Xiao Yenru was the first to arrive. As she entered the courtyard, she bowed to Nanny Shi first. Her polite and respectful look made Nanny Shi nod secretly. The first miss of Duke Xing's mansion was indeed a dignified and decent miss from a respectable family. Nanny Shi was the Empress's maid, so she recognized the Empress's dignified, decent and graceful look in front of others the most. Although Xiao Yenru's current look was a little immature for Nanny Shi, she could tell that Xiao Yenru had done a good job. The 2 sisters of the 3rd branch came later. Nanny Shi just glanced at them casually and didn't take them seriously. It was impossible for them to be selected and they were just accompanying the consort selection. Although they were also beautiful, they were much less beautiful than the 1st Miss and the 5th Mississippi. The most beautiful people in Duke Xing's mansion were the 1st Miss and the 5th Mississippi. The 1st Miss was graceful and dignified, with the dignity and figure of the legal wife. She looked like a blooming peony, and when she stood out, she seemed to be more gorgeous than all the other beauties. However, this was when the 5th Miss was not here. If the 5th Miss Xiao appeared, the 1st Miss's gorgeous beauty would seem a little vulgar and lose her stunning look. Speaking of which, the 5th Miss Xiao was really outstanding. Xiao Wanru appeared at the door. She was dressed in a very simple light blue coat and a plain white 8-piece dress with small flowers. It was very simple and plain, but it added a little seductive charm to her. Her bright eyes seemed to contain thousands of stars, and when her long and curly eyelashes fluttered, the infinite starlight was locked in her. Her skin was as white as snow, and her face was as delicate as a flower. When she didn't smile, she looked pure and indifferent, but charming and seductive when she smiled. Nanny Shi had seen all kinds of beauties in the Imperial Palace, but every time she saw the 5th Miss Xiao, she felt her heart skip a few times and secretly tasted the feeling. She had also heard the conversation between Prince Zhou and the Empress that day. Prince Zhou had always been a little straightforward and didn't care about women. The only one he mentioned was the 1st Miss of Duke Xing's mansion. He had always said that he wanted to marry her as his legal wife. Of course, this was also for the sake of the power of Duke Xing's mansion. But now he definitely said that the 1st Miss Xiao's reputation was tarnished and she could only be a concubine. But was it really like this? Nanny Shi felt her heart tremble, and some bad thoughts suddenly appeared in her mind. This was the first time that Prince Zhou had made it clear that he wanted a woman, wasn't it? In the past, although he had said that he wanted to marry the 1st Miss Xiao, when the 1st Miss Xiao went to the Yuhui nunnery to learn painting and missed the consort selection banquet, Prince Zhou also said that it was up to the Empress, and he didn't say that he had to marry the 1st Miss Xiao. If it was true, Nanny Shi hesitated, and then when she saw Nanny Zheng behind Xiao Wanru, she became more hesitant. Nanny Zheng also came here. Seeing Nanny Zheng coming over, Nanny Shi moved uneasily and felt a little pain in the chair she was sitting on. She couldn't offend this Nanny Zheng. Nanny Shi. Xiao Wanru came in, bowed slightly to Nanny Shi, and then stood up straight. Nanny Zheng stood behind Xiao Wanru, looked at Nanny Shi with burning eyes, and smiled politely. Nanny Shi stood up and said to Xiao Wanru, "5th Miss, you're too polite." "Well, 5th Miss, please sit down. Let's talk about what we're going to learn today. Xiao Wanru did as she was told and sat down beside Xiao Kailing. Xiao Yanru and Xiao Caihuan were sitting opposite her. Seeing her come over, they both smiled kindly but didn't say anything out of politeness. Xiao Wanru also smiled back. Nanny Zheng stood behind Xiao Wanru respectfully and politely, as if she was serving Xiao Wanru. Looking at the position where Nanny Zheng was standing, she hesitated for a moment, but still said with a smile, "Since Nanny Zheng is here, can you train the four misses with me?" Since she couldn't offend Nanny Zheng, of course, she was polite to Nanny Zheng. It seemed that the Empress didn't really want to fall out with Nanny Zheng. Moreover, the Empress intended to ask her to find out Nanny Zheng's background. "Nanny Shi, you're too polite. You're sent by the Empress. How dare I overstep my boundaries?" Nanny Zheng refused politely and still stood behind Xiao Wanru with a straight face. This position was originally reserved for the maids of other misses, but Xiao Wanru didn't bring any other maids today, only Nanny Zheng. Xiao Yanru also looked at Nanny Zheng. She knew that Xiao Wanru had an etiquette instructor before, but it was the first time that she had seen Nanny Zheng. Nanny Zheng was neither servile nor overbearing to Nanny Shi, which made her frown secretly. She didn't know when this person entered Duke Xing's mansion and didn't find out her identity. It was really a mistake on her part. Xiao Wanru didn't expect that there was such a powerful figure hiding around her. Could it be that Nanny Zheng had come up with all the methods Xiao Wanru used to deal with her before? As this thought flashed through her mind, she increasingly felt that it was right. Nanny Zheng, who came from the Imperial Palace and made Nanny Shi so afraid, couldn't be simple. It seemed that she had to be more careful. Chapter 724. Nanny Zheng refused, so Nanny Shi could only give up. The next step was to teach the misses etiquette, such as walking and palace rules. Nanny Shi asked them to demonstrate one by one and didn't dare to make things difficult for Xiao Wanru. Xiao Wanru's behavior was very standard. No matter how strict Nanny Shi was, she couldn't say that Xiao Wanru was wrong. She had indeed practiced this behavior for a long time, so she was familiar with it. Even Xiao Yanru, who often went to the Imperial Palace, didn't follow her rules. Therefore, after such a cycle, Nanny Shi found that she couldn't point out anything wrong with the fifth Miss Xiao. Her behavior could almost be called perfect. Even Nanny Shi couldn't do it so perfectly. Sure enough, Nanny Zheng's etiquette instructor was very competent. During the break, Nanny Shi happily invited Nanny Zheng to sit aside, poured a cup of tea for her, and said, "Nanny Zheng, take a rest too." "Nanny Shi, you're welcome." Nanny Zheng, who was much kinder, didn't refuse and sat down. "Nanny Zheng, I didn't expect that you could teach the fifth miss so well. It saves me a lot of trouble." "Thank you, Nanny Zheng." With a smile on her face, Nanny Shi looked at the place where the misses were sitting not far away and smiled kindly. She seemed to be a completely different person from when she first came to Duke Xing's mansion. "Nanny Shi, you're welcome." "Nanny Shi teaches more systematically," Nanny Zheng said indifferently. Nanny Shi rolled her eyes, leaned over, and said in a low voice, "I just came to Duke Xing's mansion, so I don't know the situation of the misses of Duke Xing's mansion. Old Madam asked me to suppress the fifth miss, but I think the fifth miss seems to be good. Why doesn't Old Madam like her? Was she here to inquire about the news?" Nanny Zheng squinted at Nanny Shi and said, "I really don't know. I just came to Duke Xing's mansion and haven't seen Old Madam before. The fifth miss has never told me about Old Madam." Although his words were also very cold, at least he spoke a little more, and his demeanor didn't seem as unapproachable as before. Nanny Shi was secretly complacent. There's really nothing much to say about this kind of thing. I heard that fifth miss is not favored in the manor. Nanny Shi said sympathetically. Then her eyes fell on Nanny Zheng, and her smile became more intimate. "Nanny Zheng, when you came out of the Imperial Palace, you must have been in a very bad condition. It's your blessing to meet a miss like fifth Miss Xiao. I heard that fifth Miss Xiao saved Prince Jin. I wonder how she did it?" Her words were very light, and she quickly changed the topic from Duke Xing's mansion to Chu Luchen. The topic changed very naturally. She deserved to be the nanny sent by the Empress. She was not as arrogant as she had been at the beginning, and now she looked very kind and cordial. Nanny Zheng glanced at Nanny Shi calmly and shook her head gently. How can I, a servant, speculate about Prince Chen's affairs? That's true. Nanny Shi said with an embarrassed smile. In fact, she was not surprised by Nanny Zheng's answer at all. If she could get an answer from Nanny Zheng easily, she would doubt it. Everyone in the Imperial Palace was clever, especially people like her, who followed their masters to serve them closely. Other people in the Imperial Palace didn't know Nanny Zheng's identity, but how could she not know it? Even if she didn't know it before, she gradually figured out some meaning from the Empress's words later, so she didn't dare to really confront Nanny Zheng. After chatting with her carefully for a while, Nanny Shi's eyes fell on Xiao Wanru, and she praised with a smile. Fifth Miss Xiao, you really surprised me. You're so outstanding. I heard that you have been cultivating in seclusion for the past 3 years. If you showed up in public early, you would definitely be famous in the capital. Fifth Miss is still young. Nanny Zheng's eyes also fell on Xiao Wanru. She was talking to several elder sisters. Sensing their gazes, she looked back and smiled gently at them. Although she is a little young, it's just right for her. Nanny Shi leaned closer and said, Fifth Miss is so beautiful that she will definitely be selected. The Empress told me to observe the 5th Mississippi. Now it seems that the 5th Miss is the best. It's just a formality for her to learn the rules. Nanny Zheng's heart skipped a beat. Why did the Empress show kindness to the Miss? Moreover, she said that she would let the Miss be selected, which was contrary to the Empress's previous intention. Could it be that the Empress wanted the Miss to enter Prince Zhou's mansion? It's not up to us, servants, to decide whether the 5th Miss will be selected or not. As for the rules, the 5th Miss has learned them for several years and is good at them. But if she really enters the Imperial Palace, she has to learn more. Although shocked, Nanny Zheng didn't show any emotion on her face. Nanny Zheng said calmly. Nanny Shi had been paying attention to Nanny Zheng's expression. Seeing that there was no change on her face, she couldn't figure out what Nanny Zheng meant for the moment. Was it really an accident that she appeared beside the 5th Miss Xiao? If it was really an accident, it would be difficult to deal with it. With Nanny Zheng's previous identity, if she didn't handle it well, she might cause other troubles. Nanny Shi knew that the most taboo for her master was never those newly favored concubines who entered the Imperial Palace. It was Nanny Zheng's master who was the most taboo for her master. For so many years, although the Empress had been firmly in the position of the Empress, no one knew how many ups and downs she had gone through. It was not so easy to stabilize the position of the Empress. Nanny Shi, Nanny Zheng. A soft voice came from the side. The two of them turned around and saw Xiao Yanru standing beside them with a smile. Seeing them looking at her together, she smiled and bowed to them gracefully. If there was anyone here who learned well, it would be the 1st Miss Xiao. Her behavior was also very well behaved. What can I do for you, 1st Miss Xiao? Nanny, she said with a smile. In her opinion, the 1st Miss Xiao would definitely enter Prince Zhou's mansion, so they naturally couldn't treat her poorly. Nanny Zheng glanced at Xiao Yanru and said nothing. I heard that Nanny Shi is the etiquette instructor of the Empress. I want to ask you about the Empress's preference for beauties. Xiao Yanru lowered her head and blushed on her fair and tender face, which made her look extremely attractive and beautiful. Although her words were a little rude, there was no one else in the room at this time, so it was not a big deal. Moreover, her words made Xiao Tehuan and Xiao Kaling turn their heads and look at them. Xiao Wanru picked up the teacup at hand and took a sip. As she glanced at Xiao Yanru's shy face, her eyes darkened a little. 1st Miss, please sit down. Let me tell you about it. Nanny Shi was happy to answer Xiao Yanru's questions. Of course, she also answered Xiao Wanru's questions by the way. After Xiao Yanru sat down, she called the other 3 misses over. She was going to tell them about the taboos in the Imperial Palace. Nanny Zheng was about to stand up, but Nanny Shi politely stopped her and pulled her to sit beside her. Nanny Zheng, you are also an etiquette instructor. Nanny Zheng, you don't have to stand behind 5th sister. I believe that 5th sister will not blame you. Xiao Yanru said with a soft smile, and then turned to Xiao Wanru and said, 5th sister, what do you think? Xiao Wanru smiled slightly and nodded with a gloomy look in her eyes. Xiao Yinru was showing goodwill to Nanny Zheng by comparing her with Nanny Shi. She implied that Xiao Yinru did not respect Nanny Zheng, treated her as an ordinary servant, and asked her to stand behind her. There was a hint of provocation in her words. It seemed that Xiao Yinru had taken a fancy to Nanny Zheng and the meaning of Nanny Zheng's background. Xiao Yinru raised the corners of her mouth silently and said yes without saying anything. Nanny Zheng, since fifth sister also agrees to let you sit down and talk, you can sit down first. If you don't sit down, Nanny Shi will also have to stand. If both of you etiquette instructors stand, it will be rude of us. What will the Empress think of our Duke Xing's mansion? Xiao Yinru said with a smile, looking more and more gentle. She was not only graceful but also good at talking. If Nanny Zheng was really unwilling to stand beside Xiao Wanru, she must have been provoked by Xiao Yinru's words. Compared with her, Xiao Yinru was really kind and considerate. Nanny Zheng, please sit down. You are my etiquette instructor, so I don't need you to stand behind me. Xiao Wanru blinked her eyes and said, Thank you, fifth miss. Thank you, first miss. Nanny Zheng thanked Xiao Yinru seriously and sat down. Seeing that Nanny Zheng was serious, Xiao Yinru had already been tempted. She really wanted this etiquette instructor, but she didn't expect that Xiao Wanru had such a treasure. If she had known it, she would have done it long ago. Nanny Zheng, you are too polite. If you can give us some advice, Duke Xing's mansion will be very grateful. Xiao Yinru said. She said this on behalf of the whole Duke Xing's mansion. Among the four misses here, she was the eldest, so she could indeed speak on behalf of Duke Xing's mansion. First miss, you are too polite. As long as I know it, I will definitely tell you. Nanny Zheng had to reply. Nanny Zheng, you are too polite. Xiao Yinru said softly with a bright and gentle smile. At first glance, she could tell that she was a master who was easy to get along with. In contrast, Xiao Wanru, who was a little aloof and sat aside, didn't look so easy to get along with. First miss, you deserve to be the first miss of Duke Xing's mansion. You are always the best. Nanny Shi praised. Then she turned to Nanny Zheng and asked, What do you think, Nanny Zheng? The misses of Duke Xing's mansion are all the best. Nanny Zheng's answer was flawless. Xiao Yinru was very dissatisfied with Nanny Zheng's answer, but she also knew that this kind of thing couldn't be rushed. Since she had taken a fancy to Nanny Zheng, she would naturally try her best to poach her. So what if she had followed Xiao Wanru for 3 years? Seeing that Xiao Wanru didn't care much about this etiquette instructor, she thought that this gave her a chance. In the future, she needed to show more kindness to Nanny Zheng and find some things to make the two of them fall out with each other. In this way, she could finally poach Nanny Zheng. With Nanny Zheng, who came from the Imperial Palace, she would be like a tiger with wings. As for Xiao Wanru, of course, she had cut off her hands and feet. How could Xiao Wanru fight with her in the future? Xiao Yinru believed that Nanny Zheng was the reason why she and Xiao Wanru had failed in the secret fight before, because she cared about Nanny Zheng very much. First miss, bad news, bad news. An old maid rushed in. When she passed the threshold, she tripped and fell to the ground in panic. Chapter 725. What's the matter? Xiao Yinru frowned. She was really unhappy that her plan was disrupted at this time. First miss, hurry up to save Madam. Madam is in trouble. The old maid got up and said anxiously with a flustered face. What? Xiao Yinru stood up in a hurry, and her face changed dramatically in shock. Madam is in trouble? First miss, please go and have a look. Please go and have a look. Someone wants to hurt Madam. The old maid wiped the sweat from her forehead and said anxiously. It could be seen that she was really panicked. Let's go and have a look. Xiao Yinru picked up her dress and ran out. How could she sit still when her biological mother was in trouble? What was more, there were 2 etiquette instructors present. Let's go and have a look. Nanny Shi stood up and said to the rest. She had come to Duke Xing's mansion to have a look, so how could she not go? Nanny Zheng stood up and responded faintly, Let's go. Hearing the 2 nannies say so, the remaining 3 misses naturally had no objection. A large group of people followed Xiao Yenru and went to the ancestral hall. On a simple couch in the ancestral hall, Nanny Xing held Madame of Duke Xing in her arms and sweated profusely. When she saw Xiao Yenru coming over with a group of people, she hurriedly screamed, "First miss, come and have a look. Madame is in trouble. Is she poisoned?" Hearing that Madame of Duke Xing was poisoned, the faces of all the people who followed her changed. They took a few steps forward and looked at Madame of Duke Xing. Madame of Duke Xing, who was half lying there, looked very pale. Instead of the normal pale face, her face was dark and seemed to be ashen. At first glance, it could be seen that her face was different from that of usual. She was lying there with her eyes closed, and there was a trace of black blood in her mouth. "Mother!" Xiao Yenru rushed over and took Madame of Duke Xing from Nanny Xing's arms, with tears falling down at once. "First miss, don't worry. If you want to find a doctor first." Shuqi, who followed her, hurriedly reminded her. Yes, find a doctor first. Shuqi, go and find a doctor. Hurry up." Xiao Yenru looked up at Shuqi in a daze and said, "Yes, miss, I'll go right away." Shuqi turned around and ran to find a doctor. Xiao Yenru pulled herself together and looked at Madame of Duke Xing, whose eyes were still tightly closed. Everyone could see that she was trembling all over, but she was still desperately gritting her teeth to calm herself down. "First miss, take a rest first. Don't worry." Nanny she couldn't help but comfort her. "Nanny, what should I do?" Xiao Yenru's tears kept falling. She grabbed Nanny she's hand and sobbed. "First miss, don't worry. You have to deal with the things here. If you are also in a mess, how can you deal with things?" Nanny she reminded her. Xiao Yenru lowered her head and wiped her tears with a handkerchief. Then she pulled herself together and raised her head. Her eyes seemed to be calm again. She looked at Nanny Xing and said, "Nanny Xing, why does my mother look like this? Did she eat something by mistake?" Seeing that Xiao Yenru quickly calmed down and dealt with things in this situation, Nanny she nodded secretly and agreed with Xiao Yenru's question. The first Miss Xiao was really good. The Empress had a good eye. "First miss, I don't know why Madame became like this. Madame only ate a few mouthfuls of the food that was delivered today, and then she became like this. I took the food from the dining hall, so how could there be anything wrong with it? If there was something wrong, there are so many people eating here, and Madame wouldn't be like this." Nanny Xing burst into tears. "Have you become like this after dinner?" Nanny Shi, who thought Xiao Yenru was a good girl, asked for her opinion. "Yes, it was like this after the meal, but I also took a bite and nothing happened." Nanny Xing patted herself hard to prove that what she said was true. "You also took a bite? Do you want to eat first or second?" Nanny she asked again. This kind of thing was obviously a fight in the backyard, which happened a lot in the Imperial Palace. It was said that there were only the second branch and the third branch in Duke Xing's mansion now. Could it be that the third branch was the one who made the trouble? She glanced at Xiao Zaihuan and Ru Keiling, who came over, and thought to herself, could it be that the madam of the third branch cleared the way for her two daughters? Thinking of this, she felt that it was a little likely. She secretly curled her lips. With the first miss and the fifth miss here, how could the third miss and the fourth miss stand out? The third branch was really bold. "The doctor is here. Come on, the doctor is here." Shuqi's nervous voice came from behind. She met the doctor halfway. The crowd made way, and the doctor came in. Xiao Yenru retreated to Nanny Shi's side and looked at Madame of Duke Xing with tears in her eyes. She looked nervous and anxious, holding the handkerchief with her fingers and trembling uncontrollably. However, she pretended to be calm on the surface. Seeing this, Nanny Shi couldn't help sighing. The first miss of Duke Xing's mansion was affectionate and righteous, and she was calm in dealing with things. Even though she lost her composure for a while just now, it was because of her mother. It would be good to train her. What happened? Someone outside the crowd asked. The crowd looked back and found it was Old Madam, so they stepped aside one by one. What happened? Old Madam walked into the crowd with Nanny Yu's hand and saw Madam of Duke Xing, who had fallen on the bed. The perverted Madam of Duke Xing's face changed dramatically. "Old Madam, Madam has been poisoned." The doctor put down Madam of Duke Xing's hand, stood up and said, Can she be saved? Xiao Yinru asked in a trembling voice. Fortunately, she was discovered in time. Moreover, the poison is slow. She won't die immediately, but her body will be hurt. The doctor shook his head and sighed. Why did the slow poison suddenly take effect? Nanny Jing thought for a moment and asked. Generally, slow poison would not be discovered. When it was discovered, there was no way to save her. Slow poison indeed can't be discovered immediately. Is Madame of Duxing poisoned a lot? Nanny Shi was trying her best to befriend Nanny Zheng now. Hearing Nanny Zheng's question, Nanny Zheng also chimed in. Old Madam looked at Nanny Shi and then at Nanny Zheng, who had an extraordinary bearing beside Nanny Shi. Although Nanny Zheng was dressed in ordinary clothes, Old Madam could tell from her bearing that she was not an ordinary old maid. She should be the etiquette instructor Nanny Zheng, whom Xiao Wanru had brought into the mansion and whom she had not seen before. There is not much poison in Madam's body, and she has spat out some now, so it should not be a big problem. Madam is lucky. Most people don't have a big reaction after taking this kind of slow poison, and they will be poisoned deeply unconsciously. However, some people are born to resist some poisons and have a big reaction. Although the poison is not big, it will be detected immediately. The doctor explained. The maids present didn't understand what he said, but most of the masters understood. Everyone's body mechanism was different. Although it was difficult to detect a slow poison, some people were born to have a strong reaction to this kind of poison and would also have a strong reaction. Of course, this kind of possibility was rare, and it was basically one kind of poison, not all of them. It was extremely accidental and almost impossible. But now it happened, so they could only sigh that Madame of Duxing was lucky. Since she had poisoned Madame of Duxing, the person must not only let others find out that she was poisoned, but also kill her. It's outrageous. Who dares to harm people in my mansion? Old Madame was so angry that her eyes were burning. Such a thing had happened in the mansion in front of Nanny Shi. What would the Empress think of her and her Duxing's mansion? Investigate, investigate, investigate everywhere. We must find out who poisoned Madame of Duxing's mansion. Old Madame hit the ground heavily with her crutch and said sternly, Grandma, let's start from here. Since the target is second aunt, there may be traces left in other places. It happened so suddenly that the person behind the scenes must not have thought of it. Xiao Wanru stood up and said, the target was Madame of Duxing. Madame of Duxing lived in the ancestral hall, so it was very likely that there was something harmful in the ancestral hall. It seemed that they should investigate here. Madame of Duxing, who was lying on the bed, moved her eyelids. Xiao Wanru, who had been watching her, raised the corner of her eyes slightly and sneered in her heart. Sure enough, she couldn't pretend anymore. Come on, investigate. Old Madam said with a gloomy face. What about my mother? Xiao Yinru, who was now a filial daughter, took a step forward, looked at Madame of Duxing with concern and asked. Take second aunt back and let the doctor prescribe medicine for her first. Nanny Xing, stay here to help investigate. Xiao Wanru said for the sake of Madame of Duxing. Old Madam nodded and thought it was a good idea. Come on, what's going on? Madame of Duxing opened her eyes and looked around weakly, as if she didn't know what had happened until now. Madam, you were poisoned. Almost had an accident. If something really happened to you, I can't absolve myself of guilt even if I die 10,000 times. Nanny Xing rushed over, pulled Madame of Duxing's sleeves, and cried loudly. Madame of Duxing sat up with the help of Nanny Xing, coughed hard, looked up at Old Madam, covered her chest with one hand, and said in a low voice, Old Madam, stop talking. You are not in good health. Go back and have a rest first, Old Madam said with a frown. Old Madam, let second aunt go back and investigate first. We can't let anyone harm second aunt for nothing. Xiao Wanru reminded Old Madam again. Come on. Old Madam raised her hand and was about to ask someone to carry Madame of Duxing back. Wait, mother, wait a minute. Madame of Duxing was anxious and said hurriedly. How could she ask someone to investigate in the ancestral hall? There were some things in it that would be exposed once they were investigated. What's wrong again? You are not in good health. Go and have a rest first. Old Madam said discontentedly. She wanted to ask someone to send Madam of Duke Xing away twice, but was interrupted by her. Mother, actually, I know something about it, but I don't know if my guess is right. Madam of Duke Xing looked around and said in embarrassment. Chapter 726. There were a lot of people around, including people from Duke Xing's mansion and people from the Imperial Palace. They didn't want others to intervene in or inquire about the internal affairs of aristocratic families, even if they were the Empress's servants. Old Madam nodded knowingly and said, "Send her to my yard first. The rest of you can go back." She didn't want others to see a good show, but she couldn't think of a way to drive Nanny Shi away. Now she had such a reason, which was very dignified. Madam of Duke Xing breathed a sigh of relief, but before she could completely relax, she heard someone say, "There may be evidence in the ancestral hall where Madam used to live." She looked up subconsciously and saw a beautiful woman in her 30s. Although she was dressed in a servant's clothes, she had an extraordinary bearing. She just looked at her without any hesitation. Madam used to live in the ancestral hall? Nanny Shi's face changed. She looked at the ancestral hall in front of her in surprise and then looked at Madam of Duke Xing, who was dressed simply and didn't look like a Madam of Duke Xing. She came here in a hurry just now and didn't think about it carefully. Now it seemed that Madam of Duke Xing had committed a crime and was locked up in the ancestral hall by Old Madam. Thinking of the rumor in the Imperial Palace that the Empress Dowager had given Madam of Duke Xing a ruler, it seemed to be true. Madam of Duke Xing annoyed the Empress Dowager and was punished by the Empress Dowager, so Duke Xing's mansion locked her up to appease the Empress Dowager. She rolled her eyes slightly and thought that she had to report this matter to the Empress. The Empress had always respected the Empress Dowager on the surface. At this time, the matter of Madam of Duke Xing happened, and the matter of the first Miss Xiao seemed to be not in the bag. "She did live in the ancestral hall," Old Madam replied awkwardly. Everyone knew this kind of thing. "Then check it." Nanny Shi suggested. Since she wanted to make friends with Nanny Zheng, she naturally agreed with Nanny Zheng's suggestion. Moreover, she wouldn't go back like this. She had to figure out the cause of this matter. If the first Miss of Duke Xing's mansion really married into Prince Zhou's mansion in the future, the Empress would have to know more about her. This kind of thing was difficult to find out later. Madame of Duke Xing coughed twice in a low voice again and said with difficulty, "No need. There is nothing in it. I got the food basket from the kitchen." Feeling anxious, she turned to look at her daughter, who was standing next to Nanny Shi, and winked at her, hinting that she couldn't let anyone investigate the ancestral hall. Xiao Yinru's eyes met Madame of Duke Xing's. At the sight of Madame of Duke Xing's expression, she naturally understood Madame of Duke Xing's meaning and felt angry for no reason. Thinking of the fact that she had been poisoned by accident before, and then looking at the current situation, she was filled with hatred and annoyance. How could she not hate the fact that her body had been damaged like this? She almost had no children in her life. Now, although she was taking Dr. Chio's medicine to recuperate, her body was definitely damaged. It would be difficult for her to conceive children in the future, and even if she did conceive, she might lose her child. How could Xiao Yinru not vent her anger on Madame of Duke Xing? Therefore, she turned a blind eye to the fact that Madame of Duke Xing was locked up. Xiao Huan had come to her and asked her to plead for Madame of Duke Xing, but Xiao Yinru directly refused. As a mother, when she plotted against Xiao Wanru, had she not thought about what would happen if she was poisoned? Moreover, at that time, she was originally unwilling to deal with Xiao Wanru by herself. It was Madame of Duke Xing who repeatedly persuaded her and said that it would be a sure thing and nothing would happen to her that she agreed. Who would have thought that once she agreed, she would almost destroy herself? It was Xiao Wanru who ruined her, but thinking that the medicine was prepared by Duke Xing's mansion and honored consort Shu, how could she not vent her anger on her? Originally, she had intended to show her motherly love and filial piety in front of Nanny Shi by taking advantage of Madame of Duke Xing's current state, but now she didn't want to get involved. At first glance, she knew that it was another scheme. If she rashly got involved now and failed, she would be implicated. Xiao Wanru had Nanny Zheng by her side. Nanny Zheng came from the Imperial Palace and had seen all kinds of people. Her mother's tricks were really not good enough for her. With resentment in her heart and feeling that Nanny Zheng was powerful, Xiao Yanru looked at Madame of Duke Xing for a few times and comforted her softly, "Mother, don't worry. It will be soon after the investigation. We will leave after the investigation and will not delay your treatment. If you are worried, you can go back first and I will investigate with Grandma." Madame of Duke Xing's face stiffened and she looked at Xiao Yanru in disbelief. She felt that Xiao Yanru had understood what she meant. Why didn't Xiao Yanru speak up for her but asked her to go back first? What did she mean? Could she go back? But how could Nanny Zheng stop them alone? "Old madam, since Big Sister said so, let's investigate it, lest the person behind the scenes finds out later." Xiao Wanru also agreed with Xiao Yanru with a smile. Madame of Duke Xing's face darkened. She reached out to pinch the corner of the quilt in her hand and breathed rapidly. Why did this happen? Why did she see hatred in her daughter's eyes? Hadn't forgiven her? Why did she still have such hatred? "Come on, check if there is anything unusual in it," Old Madam said coldly. Since everyone had said so, Old Madam naturally could not refuse. A group of servant girls and old maids brought here went to rummage through the few things in the ancestral hall. Madame of Duke Xing rolled her eyes and seemed to pass out again. "Madam, Madam," Nanny Xing shouted anxiously. Madame of Duke Xing choked. "Mother, how are you? Are you okay? I will take you back first, okay?" Hearing Madame of Duke Xing calling her, Xiao Yanru stepped forward quickly and took Madame of Duke Xing's hand with a face full of concern. Madame of Duke Xing grabbed Xiao Yanru's hand hard, dropped her sleeves to block others' view, and stretched out her finger to write a few words on Xiao Yanru's palm. "Take them away." She stared at Xiao Yanru eagerly, hinting her to take these people away. Xiao Yanru shook her head silently. She shook her head and looked back at Nanny Shi, Old Madam, and even Nanny Zheng beside her. If she stood up at this time, she would definitely be implicated, so she would not stand up for her mother at this time. Needless to say, this was another scheme of her mother and honored consort Shu. She had never heard that her mother had such a poison, so it should be from honored consort Shu. Thinking that she had fallen into such a situation because she had taken honored consort Shu's poison, Xiao Yanru also wanted to eat honored consort Shu's flesh. "Mother, don't worry. I'll check it out right away. No one will harm you in the future." She held Madame of Duke Xing's hand to stop her from moving in her sleeves, while looking sad and anxious, as if she was really worried about Madame of Duke Xing's health. Madame of Duke Xing thought that she didn't understand, so she struggled hard to get rid of her hand, but was tightly suppressed by Xiao Yanru. "Old Madam, we didn't find anything." "Old Madam, we didn't find anything either. There is nothing here." In fact, there were not many things in the ancestral hall. After checking it out, the servant girls and old maids came to report that there was nothing. Xiao Wanru's eyes fell on Madame of Duke Xing's face, and she saw a relieved expression on her face. But the next moment, Madame of Duke Xing immediately showed a weak look, as if the relieved expression she had seen just now was an illusion. Xiao Wanru narrowed her watery eyes slightly. There must be something wrong, but the problem was not in the ancestral hall. But if it was not in the ancestral hall, where was it? "Mother, since you didn't find anything, go back first. I have something to tell you." Madame of Duke Xing looked at Old Madam and said, as if she had a secret to tell her, "But there were too many people here." Old Madam fell silent for a moment, looked around, and indeed found nothing. It seemed that there was nothing wrong here. She nodded at once and was about to agree with her and leave with her. However, Nanny Zheng, who was beside her, raised her eyes and said calmly, "Wait." Madame of Duke Xing glared at Nanny Zheng and said angrily, "Who are you and where do you come from? Why do you keep interrupting when masters are talking? Take her away and beat her, beat her." She remembered that it was this woman who said that she wanted to check the ancestral hall just now, but now she was still so persistent. It was really hateful. When she recovered in the future, she would definitely beat this old woman who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth to death. Nanny Zheng did not know that her words had made Madame of Duke Xing want to kill her. At this time, her eyes still fell on Madame of Duke Xing's face coldly. "Madam, I am the etiquette instructor of the 5th Miss, and I followed the 5th Miss to Duke Xing's mansion. I used to have a rank in the palace." It was completely different for a palace servant to have a rank or not. Madame of Duke Xing froze for a moment and subconsciously looked at Xiao Yanru. How could Xiao Wanru have a palace servant with a rank in the palace? Moreover, she was her etiquette instructor. Why didn't she know it before? Xiao Yanru nodded at her silently and secretly despised her mother. She had been fighting with Xiao Wanru for so long. Didn't she say that she had found out everything about Xiao Wanru? Why didn't she find out that Xiao Wanru had an etiquette instructor with a powerful background? If she had known this, she would not have taken it lightly. "Old madam, you haven't checked the back of the ancestral hall, have you?" Nanny Zheng ignored Madame of Duke Xing and turned to Old Madam. "What's behind the ancestral hall?" Old Madam said angrily. "Maybe there are some shameful things hidden there." Nanny Zheng said meaningfully. Her words reminded Nanny Shi, and she immediately said in agreement, "Indeed, we should go to the back of the ancestral hall to have a look. This kind of place is the most prone to accidents. When I was in the palace, there was also such a thing. In the end, it was found in the back, the most inconspicuous place." Madame of Duke Xing was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. Where did these idiots come from? They had ruined her plan again and again. Now even Nanny Shi, who served the Empress, had intervened in it. How could she not be angry? But no matter how angry she was, there was nothing she could do now. She could only shake Xiao Yanru's hand hard and ask her to find a way. However, Xiao Yanru did not say a word, as if she did not notice it. "Go to the back and have a look," Old Madam ordered. Chapter 727. Old Madam. Seeing that Old Madam was going to send someone to investigate again, Madame of Duke Xing was so anxious that she rolled her eyes and fainted again. She just glanced around and found an unexpected surprise. Old Madam did not bring many servants, only 4 or 5. If she asked someone to carry the bed, at least these servants could be taken away. If no one could check, she would have time to rest. Madam, you can't be hurt." Nanny Sheng, who got the hint from Madame of Duke Xing, hurriedly shouted and turned to Old Madam to beg, "Old Madam, can you ask someone to carry Madam out first? If she stays any longer, it will be really bad for her." "Come on, carry the bed." Old Madam frowned and ordered. The servant girls and old maids who were going to check behind stopped. At first glance, they could tell that the bed could not be carried by 2 people. Although it was a simple bed, the servant girls and old maids looked thin and did not seem to be very strong. It took 2 or 3 people standing on each side to carry it. "Old Madam, I am afraid that it is not easy to carry Second Aunt's bed. Why don't we put Second Aunt on the wide stool over there? It will be more convenient and faster to carry her there." Xiao Wanru pointed to a long stool in the corner and said. The long spring stool was sometimes used as a small sacrificial table. It was much wider than a normal spring stool, and there would be no problem for a person to lie on it. Furthermore, it was much smaller than a couch and much lighter. With one person raising their head and one person lifting their feet, and with another person protecting them in the middle, there would be no problem. Seeing it, Old Madam nodded and also thought it was a good idea. "Come on, carry Madam to the spring stool." Seeing the size of the spring stool, Nanny Sheng was angry and anxious. But now she was also at a loss and did not know how to deal with it. She reached out and pulled Madame of Duke Xing's hand as a hint. Madame of Duke Xing's eyes were closed, but her ears had been listening. She gritted her teeth with hatred. It turned out that Xiao Wanru, the bitch, had ruined her plan again. 2 old maids had come to carry her. They carefully wrapped her in the quilt and carried her to the spring stool. Jiang Shi was just about to pretend that she had accidentally fallen off the spring stool, but the corners of the quilt were held down by people on both sides. Even if she wanted to roll away, she couldn't. "Old Madam, why don't you let Nanny Sheng take Second Aunt back? You stay here and continue to investigate." Xiao Wanru's voice was very soft and gentle, but when Madame of Duke Xing heard it, she almost opened her eyes and bit her fiercely. Old Madam nodded and sent 2 servants to the back. Yu Jia stood in the middle and helped Madame Jiang wrap the quilt again. Then she stepped aside. Madame Jiang was dizzy at this time. When she lifted the quilt, she put it flat so that it wouldn't fall again. The two old maids carried her away one after another. Nanny Sheng hurriedly followed them in tears. The doctor also followed them to make a prescription. There was no writing brush, ink, paper, and inkstone here, so he couldn't make a prescription. Although Jiang Shi, who was lying on the spring stool, really wanted to find a way to stay, she had no choice but to leave at this time. Sensing that the spring stool under her was moving further and further away, Jiang Shi's heart burned with anxiety, but there was nothing she could do. Old madam, what do you think this is?" An old maid shouted and came out from the back with a small piece of oiled paper. It looked like an oiled paper for wrapping things. There were mud stains on the outside, but there were faint traces of white powder inside. It should be some white powder. Where did it come from? Old madam asked with a cold face. I went to the back and saw traces of digging under a tree, so I dug up the soil again and saw such a piece of oiled paper under it. The old maid said and waved the oiled paper in her hand. A strange smell of medicine came out in the air. Xiao Wanru took a step back and reached out to cover her nose with a handkerchief. Miss, will you be poisoned after smelling it? Yu Jia whispered. Her voice was not loud, but it was enough for Xiao Yinru, who was beside her, to hear. Xiao Yinru took a few steps back and covered her mouth with a handkerchief. She couldn't stand it now. She didn't know what vicious tricks her mother and honored consort Shu had played, but she couldn't afford to get hurt again. Seeing that both of them had stepped back, Xiao Zaihuan and Xiao Kaling looked at each other and stepped back as well. They were not stupid. At first glance, they could tell that the oiled paper was not a good thing. Otherwise, it would not have been buried. It seemed that his second aunt was stirring up trouble again. Nanny Jing didn't step back. She looked at Nanny Shi beside her and asked, Nanny Shi, do you know what this is? Have you ever seen such a thing in the Imperial Palace? Her words were extremely provocative and a little arrogant, as if she would teach Nanny Shi what Nanny Shi didn't know. Nanny Shi frowned and was unhappy. Although she wanted to make friends with Nanny Zheng, she did it for the Empress's sake. Now Nanny Zheng said that she was inexperienced. As a servant of the Empress, how could she be inexperienced? She would not only lose face, but also the Empress. Taking a step forward, Nanny Shi looked at the oiled paper and smelled it. After thinking for a while, her face changed dramatically. She looked at Nanny Zheng in surprise and asked in a trembling voice, Is this, that poison? She suddenly remembered something that had happened in the Imperial Palace. A chronic poison had poisoned a favored concubine in the former Imperial Palace to death. At that time, the Empress was still a princess, and Nanny Shi was a nanny in the prince's mansion who followed the princess. The reason why Nanny Shi remembered it was that Princess was also involved in this matter at that time. Princess was almost blamed for it, and she was even locked in a cold palace because of it. At that time, Princess was almost deposed. Although such a thing had passed for a long time, Nanny Shi would never forget it. The late emperor's favored concubine, who was poisoned to death, was finally found to have been poisoned. It should be that poison. The late emperor's concubine died because of it. Nanny Zheng said vaguely, which meant that she also knew about it. But why does Duke Xing's mansion have this poison? Nanny Zheng asked in confusion. It was obvious that she was talking to herself. Old madam, why does Duke Xing's mansion have this poison? Nanny Shi turned around, looked at old madam with a gloomy face, and scolded her. Is this poison? Old madam was stunned and asked. It should be the poison that poisoned your mansions, madam, but I don't know who buried it and who poisoned madam of Duke Xing's food. This poison has something to do with what happened in the Imperial Palace. Nanny Shi stared at old madam and said, although what happened in the Imperial Palace was solved later and the other concubine who poisoned this favored concubine was found, how could Nanny Shi not pay attention to the poison after so many years? Old madam's heart skipped a beat, and her face changed dramatically. She looked at the paper bag containing the poison and then at Nanny Shi. She gritted her teeth and said with hatred, Nanny, please come with me. Madam of Duke Xing's mansion had left, so she couldn't get the answer even if she wanted to. Xiao Wanru glanced at Xiao Yinru. Seeing that Xiao Yinru just lowered her head and covered her nose with a handkerchief without saying a word, a trace of deepness flashed across her eyes. As she had guessed, Xiao Yinru was the best at keeping herself safe and would never take any risk for the Zhang's mansion. Originally, this was within her calculation. She had to deal with them one by one. Now she had to break one of Madame of Duke Xing's mansion's arms and legs first, and then tie Madame of Duke Xing's mansion's hands and feet. It had been 3 years. She had waited for 3 years. It was time to take action. Old Madame took everyone to the Chuntang courtyard where she lived. She had asked someone to carry Madame of Duke Xing to her courtyard before. She had felt that Madame of Duke Xing's action at that time was very strange and wanted to ask about it. In the current situation, even if she didn't want Nanny Shi and the others to follow her, she couldn't say it. Just now, Nanny Shi had made it clear that it had something to do with the Imperial Palace. Since it had something to do with the Imperial Palace, even if it had been a long time, old Madame couldn't take it lightly. She only hoped that Madame of Duke Xing was smart and wouldn't lead the matter to Duke Xing's mansion. At this time, Madame of Duke Xing had woken up and was resting in a spare wing room. Hearing the sound at the gate of the courtyard, she looked through the window and saw a group of people coming to her. When she saw old Madame's cold and sharp eyes, she immediately panicked. Grabbing Nanny Sheng, who was also panicked and couldn't stand still, Madame of Duke Xing pulled herself together and said, "Nanny Sheng, don't worry. I will treat your family well. I will find a decent job for your youngest son, give your 1-month-old grandson a gold longevity lock, and give each of your 2 sons a courtyard." "Madam!" Nanny Sheng was so shocked that she knelt down with a plop, her face pale. "Don't worry. I will never break my promise. If I break my promise, I will die a horrible death. But if you don't agree, even if something happens to me, your family, I'm afraid that they will die." Madame of Duke Xing looked at Nanny Sheng coldly with a threatening look in her eyes. At this time, she couldn't think of any other way. "Madam, Nanny Sheng choked with sobs, frightened and panicked. At this time, she really regretted it. If she had known this, she would not have fetched those things anyway, let alone let Madame of Duke Xing take them. Now Madame wanted to make her a scapegoat, but she couldn't refuse. Her youngest son was still young and had not married, but he was engaged. She was really worried. Her eldest grandson had just been born. He was chubby and cute. She wanted to earn some money for him, but now she had no choice but to agree to this matter. If she didn't agree, Madame would also push the blame on her, and her family might die because of her. Nanny Sheng didn't dare to gamble. She couldn't afford to gamble. How could she dare to risk the lives of her family? "Madam, I hope Madame will not forget what you said today." Nanny Sheng wiped away her tears and said with hatred. At this time, she had no way out. "Don't worry. I will never break my promise. Let your youngest son follow, and he needs a clever servant." Madame of Duke Xing promised. "Madam, don't worry. I will agree. If you can push the blame on Xiao Wanru, I will not only promise the future of your children and grandchildren, but also reward them handsomely so that they can live comfortably for the rest of their lives." Nanny Sheng's tears fell again, but she wiped them away again, stood up with the help of the bed, and looked at the door. The door was pushed open heavily. Old Madame stood at the door angrily and looked at Madame of Duke Xing inside. There was a coldness in her eyes that Madame of Duke Xing could understand. Chapter 728. It's great that Madame has woken up. Can you ask Madame what is wrapped in the oiled paper buried in the mud behind the ancestral hall? Where did it come from? Why is there such a thing in your mansion? Seeing that Madame of Duke Xing was awake, Nanny Shi stepped forward quickly, rushed to old Madame and asked. She had to be anxious. This kind of thing was related to the Imperial Palace and the Empress. She had to report it to the Empress. If she couldn't figure it out, she would definitely be scolded by the Empress when she went back. It was fine if she had found an ordinary chronic poison just now, but it was difficult for her to explain it to the Empress if she didn't ask about it. Seeing Nanny Shi's anxious look, Xiao Wanru looked at Nanny Zheng, who was standing aside, and then slowly lowered her head. She had originally prepared this powder at Nanny Zhang's suggestion and replaced it with another chronic poison powder prepared by honored consort Shu. As expected, Nanny Shi was very concerned about it. Now it was the best for Nanny Shi to take the lead. Even if old madam was dissatisfied with Nanny Shi, she just needed to watch from the side. Nanny Zhang's words had attracted people's attention. Fortunately, Nanny Zhang's identity as an etiquette instructor had been exposed. Otherwise, old madam would definitely not spare her for what she had said just now. Old madam looked at Madame of Duke Xing with a gloomy face, and there was a gloominess in her eyes that others couldn't understand. Madame of Duke Xing had been raised by old madam since she was a child, so she certainly knew why Madame of Duke Xing hated old madam so much. However, it was not the time for her to care about old madam. Nanny Shi's words made her feel a sense of crisis. I don't know what you are talking about. She looked at Nanny Shi weakly with a blank face and pretended that she didn't understand what Nanny Shi said. Madame of Duke Xing, this is a big deal. This kind of poison has happened in the Imperial Palace before. At that time, a favored concubine of the former emperor died because of it. After investigation, they only found out who poisoned her, but they didn't know how the poison got into the Imperial Palace. But now I found it behind the ancestral hall where you live. Nanny Shi's face darkened, and she said unhappily. Madame of Duke Xing was at a loss at first, and then she seemed to think of something. Her face instantly stiffened, and she turned to Nanny Xing in disbelief. Her lips trembled twice, and she looked at Nanny Xing with sorrow and sadness in her eyes. Nanny Xing, why do you want to hurt me like this? The poisonous powder wrapped in oiled paper was dug out from the back of the ancestral hall. It could be seen that the poisonous powder was put in the ancestral hall and buried for fear of being discovered. There were only 2 people in the ancestral hall. The one who was poisoned was Madame of Duke Xing, so the one who poisoned must be Nanny Xing. Xiao Wanru sneered in her heart. Madame of Duke Xing was cruel to her and did not poison Nanny Xing at that time. Otherwise, it would be difficult for her to justify herself now. Her watery eyes glanced at old madam's face. Seeing that old madam looked better than before, a trace of ridicule flashed in her eyes. Madam, Nanny Xing knelt down in front of Madame of Duke Xing and cried sorrowfully and desperately. She was really desperate. There was no way for her to survive now. Nanny Xing, how did I treat you? In the past, I always remembered you because you were not only my personal nanny but also Duke Xing's wet nurse. After my mother gave you to me, you have been with me. How could my mother's people hurt me? But now, how could you let me and my mother down like this? Madame of Duke Xing cried weakly and tried to pull Nanny Xing's hand. It seemed that she wanted Nanny Xing to tell her the reason. However, after she stretched out her hand, she fell back powerlessly. She leaned back heavily and looked at Nanny Xing with tears in her eyes, unable to say a word. She not only mentioned herself, but also mentioned old madam. Old madam raised the corner of her eyes and glared at Nanny Xing fiercely. She also remembered that she did give Nanny Xing to Jiang Wanyan at the beginning. At that time, Jiang Wanyan had just come to her mansion. The wet nurse she brought with her was a good-for-nothing who was greedy and lazy. Old madam really couldn't stand it, so she sent her second son's wet nurse. On the one hand, she could take care of Nanny Xing, and on the other hand, she could show others that she valued her niece. The reason why she sent her second son's wet nurse was that there were 2 wet nurses around her son. The 2 wet nurses didn't get along well with each other, so she could send one of them out so that her son's side wouldn't be peaceful. When she sent Nanny Xing out, she had been very obedient. After standing by her daughter-in-law's side for so many years, she really felt relieved. Unexpectedly, Nanny Xing betrayed her master and drugged her daughter-in-law with the poison related to the palace. How could she not be angry? If the poison related to the palace was involved, even Duke Xing's mansion wouldn't be able to get away with it. Thinking that her good deed at the beginning had such a big deviation, old madam became more and more angry with Nanny Xing. If she had known that this servant was disloyal, she should have killed her long ago, so as not to cause such trouble. Nanny Shi spoke. Although she was full of anger, she had to let Nanny Shi speak. Tell me, who asked you to frame up your master? Old madam scolded her. Oh madam, oh madam, I can't say it. I can't say it. Nanny Sheng cried loudly and looked for someone in the crowd. Nanny Jing took a step forward and stood in front of Xiao Wanru. She was taller than Xiao Wanru, so she happened to block Xiao Wanru completely. The person who can order Madam's most intimate old maid supervisor must not be an ordinary person. I think this person must be extremely powerful in Duke Xing's mansion. Otherwise, Nanny Xing wouldn't betray her master. Nanny Xing said slowly with a calm look. When Nanny Xing looked for someone in the crowd, she knew that something was wrong, so she stood in front of Xiao Wanru and said this. Both she and Xiao Wanru, who was standing behind her, understood that Nanny Xing wanted to find someone to be her scapegoat before she died. It should be because Nanny Xing had made a deal with Madam of Duke Xing before they came in, so Nanny Xing wanted to find Xiao Wanru to be her scapegoat. Hearing Nanny Zheng's words, Nanny Xing glared at her fiercely. She was already a dying person now, so there was nothing to be afraid of. What a fierce look! A little servant girl was scared and muttered in a low voice. Who the hell do you work for? Why do you want to frame up Madam of Duke Xing? Nanny Shi was furious. She had been ignored. She walked up to Nanny Xing in a few steps and tried to pull her up. Nanny Xing shook off her hand with force and even pushed her away rudely. She turned to look at Old Madam and said, Old Madam, I was really framed by someone. It was fifth. Xiao Wanru's heart skipped a beat and she knew that it was not good. If Nanny Xing said it was related to her, she would not be able to clear her name after Nanny Xing died. How dare you push Nanny Shi? Nanny Xing stretched out her hand and pushed Nanny Xing. Nanny Xing was pushed back a few steps and almost fell. How dare a lowly servant who betrays her master be so arrogant? Who gave you such courage? Nanny Shi didn't expect that an old maid who had been caught on the spot would dare to push her. At this time, she was already fuming with anger. Seeing Nanny Xing speak up for her, she felt even angrier. Since when did she need others to vent her anger on her behalf? She rushed up to Nanny Xing and slapped Nanny Xing hard in the face, which immediately made Nanny Xing's face swollen. After slapping Nanny Xing, she still felt angry, so she kicked Nanny Xing hard and made her fall to the ground. Nanny Shi, don't be angry. She may be rebelling. At that time, she will be punished by the 9 generations of her family. No one can save her. Nanny Zheng, who was also an etiquette instructor and had gotten along well with her before, took 2 steps forward to stop Nanny Shi, pulled her back a few steps, and comforted her. Nanny Xing was kicked to the ground. She struggled to look at Madam of Duke Xing with a pleading face. Punished by the 9 generations of her family? She had never thought that not only would she die, but also her descendants might be killed. She didn't dare to accept it. She hesitated. Nanny Xing, you also have children. How could you do such a thing? You framed me, your master. I used to be kind to others. Who are you trying to frame me for? Tell me. Madame of Duke Xing, who was lying on the bed, seemed to have just taken a deep breath and said to Nanny Xing in tears. Xiao Wanru sneered in her heart. What Madame of Duke Xing said was very good. She dragged Nanny Shi's words to the level of rebellion and then dragged it back to the dispute between women in the inner court. This was to give Nanny Xing confidence and let Nanny Xing know that this was just a dispute between women in the inner court and she would be the only one to die. Madam, Nanny Xing was in great grief. In fact, she really didn't want to wait for death, but how could she not understand the meaning of Madam's words? She had to agree to it even if she didn't want to. She gritted her teeth and glanced at the crowd, but still didn't see the 5th miss, who she wanted to see. However, at this moment, she had no intention of framing Xiao Wanru. She suddenly came to her senses when she was about to die. If the 5th miss could be schemed against, Madam wouldn't have fallen into such a situation. Even in the inner court, she knew the crime of rebellion. It was a crime punishable by the execution of the whole family. Even if she was going to die, she had to do it quickly. She couldn't let others use it to talk about her. At that time, her family would really be unable to survive. She couldn't get involved with the 5th Mississippi, otherwise, she would be entangled with her. Even if she died, her family might not have a good ending. Madam, I hope Madam won't. Nanny Xing stood up and cried. But at this time, no one sympathized with her. A servant who betrayed her master would definitely end up like this. Someone, take her away and interrogate her. We must find out where the poison came from and who intended to harm people. Old Madam said angrily. Madam of Duke Xing looked sad and unwilling to watch. She swung her sleeves up to cover her face. Xiao Wanru had been paying attention to her movements, so she saw her hands pressing down hard in her sleeves. A trace of sarcasm flashed across her watery eyes. She didn't expect to trip up Madam of Duke Xing at once. Now she had to get rid of Madam of Duke Xing's lackeys first. 2 old maids went over to pull Nanny Xing and wanted to take her away for interrogation. However, after she stood up, she was pushed away fiercely. No, stop her. Nanny Shi, who was experienced, immediately shouted. Before the 2 old maids could react, Nanny Xing slammed against the cabinet on one side. His head immediately started to bleed, and his whole body slowly slid down from the surface of the cabinet. Chapter 729. There were so many people in the room, but it was eerily quiet. Seeing Nanny Xing fall to the ground with blood all over her head, everyone was dumbfounded. Nanny Shi, go and listen to what she said. Nanny Zheng, who came to her senses the fastest, immediately reminded Nanny Shi. Nanny Shi was stunned and immediately understood. Seeing that Nanny Xing's mouth was still moving weakly, Nanny Zheng seemed to be talking, so she hurried forward. Nanny Shi, don't go up. This is too terrible. Xiao Yinru reached out to hold Nanny Shi and said. She seemed to be frightened and trembling all over. She pulled Nanny Shi's sleeves tightly and looked at Nanny Xing blankly, as if she was really frightened, and subconsciously pulled Nanny Shi's sleeves. Xiao Yinru was worried that Nanny Xing would say something unconsciously at this time and expose the Madam of Duke Xing's identity. Her voice was not loud, but it awakened the others in the room. Someone, go and see if Nanny Xing is dead. Old Madam calmed down and said sternly. Nanny Xing's death at this time could be regarded as unknown. How could she be reconciled to it? A bold old maid went over, reached out to touch Nanny Xing's nose, felt it, and said, Old Madam, she is dead. Nanny Xing, why do you take it so hard? Madam of Duke Xing, who was lying on the bed, also came to her senses. She cried and wanted to get out of bed, but was held down tightly by a maid beside the bed. She could only look sadly at Nanny Xing, who was lying in a pool of blood. At this time, you are still pitiful? Look at you now. Old Madam scolded angrily. Madam of Duke Xing lowered her head and cried, Mother, I have been her servant for many years. I don't know why she suddenly betrayed me and seemed to want to kill me. Suddenly meant that it had happened recently. Someone wanted to kill her, meant that someone was not on good terms with her. No matter what, this matter would attract people's attention. Xiao Wanru sneered in her heart and slowly walked out from behind Nanny Zheng. It seemed that Madam of Country Xing had not intended to let it go and wanted to push the blame on her. Sensing Old Madam's gloomy and suspicious gaze beside her, Xiao Wanru raised her head calmly and said, Old Madam, since Nanny Xing has always been second-hand subordinate, she must have had contact with Nanny Xing in the past when such a big thing happened. What's more, it can only be done by a person with great connections in Duke Xing's mansion. Check it out. Nanny Xing was not an outsider. In Duke Xing's mansion, she was not only a senior, but also a supervisor nanny with high status and power. Ordinary people could not buy off people like her. Old Madam looked at Xiao Wanru with gloomy and cold eyes. Xiao Wanru looked at Old Madam without fear and looked very magnanimous. Did Nanny Xing just say, Fifth miss? Shuqi got Xiao Yenru's hint and said timidly. Fifth sister? Xiao Yenru said casually and took a step back in shock. Everyone present had indeed heard Nanny Xing's words just now. At that time, most of them did not react and did not know what Nanny Xing said. Now hearing Xiao Yenru's words, they immediately looked at Xiao Wanru and thought that it seemed to be true. Could it be that Nanny Xing said, Fifth miss? Seeing so many people turn to look at her, Xiao Wanru said unhurriedly, Big sister, Although you and I have had some minor conflicts, it is just an estrangement between sisters who seldom get along with each other. Why did Big Sister say that at this time? Could it be that Big Sister has always disliked me in the past? She smiled gracefully and did not panic because of Xiao Yinru's accusation at all, which made Nanny Shi, who was looking at them, a little confused. Looking at Xiao Yinru and then at Xiao Wanru, Nanny Shi decided that she'd better wait a little longer. The two people in front of her were not the old maids just now. They were the lineal misses of the two branches of Duke Xing's mansion. Judging from the momentum, both of them had great influence. Big Sister, why are you deliberately making people misunderstand you now? She said the last sentence slowly after a while with a trace of coldness. She looked at Xiao Yinru with her beautiful watery eyes without any warmth and had no intention of avoiding her. In front of Nanny Shi, who was sent by the Empress, she mercilessly lifted the veil of tenderness between her and Xiao Yinru. Xiao Yinru was stunned. She did not expect that Xiao Wanru would really dare to say such words in front of so many people and lift the last thin veil between them. At this moment, her face turned as red as fire. Her breath involuntarily became heavier, and she almost gnashed her teeth and glared at Xiao Wanru. She had made great efforts to make herself dignified, decent, and magnanimous, which were all prepared for her to set foot on the throne of the Empress in the future. But now Xiao Wanru dared to slap her in the face and say such words to her. Shuqi, who was behind her, tugged at her sleeves a little anxiously. Xiao Yinru grasped the last trace of reason, slowly came to her senses, tried hard to suppress the irritation and hatred in her heart, and slowly showed an extremely innocent and gentle smile on her face. Fifth Sister, I'm sorry. I spoke too quickly just now. Maybe I heard it wrong. She said this very well, as if she really regretted it. Even if there was something fishy going on between members of aristocratic families, they should not talk about it in front of outsiders, especially outsiders like Nanny Shi. At this time, they should keep it a secret as much as possible. Big Sister, I'm sorry. I spoke too quickly just now. Maybe I misunderstood Big Sister's kindness. Xiao Wanru suddenly smiled, and her dimples bloomed like a flower. Her words corresponded very well with Xiao Yinru's. Xiao Yinru's previous words made people feel that she really did not mention the word fifth on purpose. However, Xiao Wanru's words immediately made people feel a little weird. They always felt that what she said before seemed to be unintentional. Not only was she not sincere at all, but she did it on purpose. Xiao Yinru was so angry that she almost reached out to scratch Xiao Wanru's beautiful pink face with a smile. She clenched her hands hard in her sleeves and said with an increasingly gentle smile, Fifth Sister, I panicked just now. I'm sorry, Fifth Sister. In fact, you have to ask my mother about it. It started from my mother. After saying that, she turned to Madame of Duke Xing, who was lying on the bed, walked up to the bed, held Madame of Duke Xing's cold hand and said, Mother, do you think Nanny Xing was bewitched by someone? You are in the ancestral hall now, and you have not seen anyone else. Why did Nanny Xing poison you? Madame of Duke Xing's face suddenly stiffened. She looked at Xiao Yinru in disbelief and trembled all over with anger. Her good daughter, in order to shift the blame to someone else, actually put the blame on her. If it weren't for the fact that there were many people in the room at this time, she would like to slap her hard. Her daughter, whom she had raised, not only did not cherish her mother, but also used her as a shield. Madame of Duke Xing had finally caught Nanny Xing's words and wanted to make a fuss about it. But after Nanny Xing's words, it was difficult for her to put the blame on Xiao Wanru. Madame of Duke Xing held Xiao Yinru's hand hard and stabbed her long nails into Xiao Yinru's palm. She was extremely resentful, but she still had to show a sad expression and said, I don't know. I only chant scriptures and worship ancestors in the ancestral hall every day. I don't know how she betrayed her master. After saying that, she pushed Xiao Yinru away fiercely, turned to the inside, and sobbed. It could be seen that the master and servant had a deep relationship. Xiao Wanru's eyes fell on her with a bit of sarcasm and coldness. Xiao Yinru was flustered by her ruthlessly tearing up her face, so she deliberately put the blame on Madame of Duke Xing in order to cover up the fact that she didn't get along with her. She didn't want the Empress to know that she was not as kind to her sister as others said. Xiao Yanru's goal had always been the high and mighty Empress, so she could tear up her face, but she couldn't. Moreover, she had to work hard to maintain her dignified and generous image of the first Miss of Duke Xing's mansion in front of others. Go and find out who she has been with these days and where she has been. Old Madam said with a sullen face. Old Madam, if you find out anything, be sure to tell me. The Empress also wants to find out how the poison in the Imperial Palace got involved in Duke Xing's mansion. Nanny, she said. Old Madam glanced at Nanny Shi angrily, but had to agree. Since it had come to this, they couldn't find out anything in a short time, so Old Madam asked everyone to leave. At this time, the misses were not in the mood to learn the rules, so they were sent back to their courtyards. Nanny Shi, who was going to go to the Imperial Palace to report to the Empress, also mentioned it and said goodbye to Old Madam. Old Madam didn't want Nanny Shi to go back and talk about it, but she couldn't stop her, so she could only say a few words implicitly and give Nanny Shi a big gift, hoping that Nanny Shi could talk about the good news of their family when she entered the Imperial Palace. After such a thing happened and even Nanny Xing died, no one was in the mood to say anything at this time, so the misses left at the gate of the courtyard. Xiao Yanru originally wanted to say something to Xiao Wanru, but when she saw Nanny Xing behind Xiao Wanru looking at her with a faint smile, she hesitated for a moment. In the end, she could only watch Xiao Wanru leave. Xiao Yanru felt a dull pain in her sleeves because Madame of Duke Xing had pinched her palm just now. It was very painful, but it didn't hurt her face at all. Xiao Wanru's last words today were almost a slap in her face in front of Nanny Shi. However, she couldn't continue to argue with Xiao Wanru. Otherwise, even if she won the argument, it would be no good for her. Miss. Seeing her staring at Xiao Wanru's back in a daze, Shuqi reminded her in a low voice. Let's go. Xiao Yanru withdrew her venomous gaze and turned to go to her courtyard. She couldn't act rashly and ruin the plan. The consort selection was about to take place, so she couldn't really confront Xiao Wanru at this time. She had to bear it for the time being. In the future, there would be plenty of opportunities to kill Xiao Wanru. For the sake of the future, she could bear anything. Fortunately, she didn't participate in her mother's action this time. Even if something happened now, she wouldn't be implicated. Until now, she didn't intend to help Madame of Duke Xing. She endured it in order to trample Xiao Wanru to death in the future. She wanted to trample Xiao Wanru into the mud and make her suffer. Chapter 730. When Xiao Jing of Duke Xing returned to his mansion, he went directly to old Madame's Xining Pavilion. Hearing that Madame of Duke Xing had returned to her own Ingyue Pavilion, he went directly to Ingyue Pavilion with his servants. In the main room, Madame of Duke Xing was lying on the bed. She felt better after taking the medicine, so she was in the mood to think about what had happened today. Nanny Xing was her right-hand woman and could be said to be her most trusted person. Now she had to cut her off, so how could she feel comfortable? She often communicated with honored consort Shu through Nanny Xing in the palace. Now Nanny Xing was dead. Who should she contact next? Was the poison given by honored consort Shu related to what had happened in the palace before? Madame of Duke Xing frowned. She also had complaints about honored consort Shu. She just wanted an ordinary, effective, chronic poison that was not easy to be detected. How could honored consort Shu do that? How could honored consort Shu give her such an obvious poison? Wasn't this pushing her to the teeth of the storm? The current matter was very difficult. She originally thought that since something had happened to her, and it happened after the meal, they would definitely investigate the meal. It was impossible for them to investigate her immediately. As long as things slowed down a little, she would ask Nanny Xing to find another place to destroy the oiled paper. Unexpectedly, they didn't investigate the canteen at that time, but directly investigated her, even the back of the ancestral hall. As a result, she was in a mess and had to push Nanny Xing out. In fact, she had no other choice. Although the crisis was over for the time being, she couldn't get in touch with honored consort Shu for the time being. Something had happened to her, and she couldn't inform honored consort Shu quickly. How could she not be anxious? Next, Who should be her most trusted person to deal with the extremely secretive things around her? Madame of Duke Xing couldn't think of it for a moment. Suddenly, she thought of Xiao Yanru's performance and felt very angry. Her daughter didn't mean to help her at all. If she had said a few more words just now that it had something to do with Xiao Wanru, she might have come up with a good way to push the blame to Xiao Wanru. But what should she do now? She was really unwilling to let Xiao Wanru escape. She came out of the ancestral hall, and now she was the victim. It was impossible for Duke Xing's mansion to watch her be killed in the ancestral hall again, which was what she had expected. But her body was also injured. Just now, she really felt that her body was very uncomfortable. This was also why her face was ashen. Color is one of the most important reasons. At this time, even though he had taken the medicine and felt slightly better, he still felt cold all over, his chest felt stuffy, and his throat felt nauseous. It was a feeling that he couldn't spit it out, nor could he swallow it. His head was dizzy, and he couldn't calm down and think of an idea at all. The door was suddenly kicked open, and Duke Xing, who was round and chubby, barged in with a cold and angry face. The servant girl beside the bed was so frightened that her face turned pale. She was about to step forward and bow. Scram! Duke Xing waved his hand. The servant girl did not dare to say more. She trotted out of the door and closed it for them. Duke Xing walked to the bed and looked at Madame of Duke Xing coldly. Madame of Duke Xing involuntarily avoided his eyes and murmured, "Duke?" This sentence seemed to wake Duke Xing up. He reached out to grab Madame of Duke Xing's collar, directly pulled her out of the bed, and threw her hard to the ground. Madame of Duke Xing didn't expect that Duke Xing would really take action. She was thrown out and her body hit the foot of the table heavily, which made her curl up in pain. The cups and teapots on the cups were knocked down, and one even broke beside her. The fragments flew over and scratched her face, which made her subconsciously cover her face in pain. When she put down her hand, she immediately found that there was blood on her hand and screamed in fear. Duke Xing seemed to not see Madame of Duke Xing's suffering. He stared at Madame of Duke Xing with his cold eyes, which were like those of a poisonous snake. At this time, there were no outsiders, so he did not intend to pretend. "Well, how dare you poison yourself? Do you want to die? If you want to die, just say it. I will strangle you now." As Duke Xing said, he reached out to lift Madame of Duke Xing and pushed her to the edge of the bed. His hands fell together, and he pinched her neck hard and exerted force. Madame of Duke Xing kicked Duke Xing crazily with her hands and feet, and her eyes were full of anger. The feeling of suffocation in her neck not only made her unable to speak, but also made her almost unable to breathe. She even felt dizzy. She saw the murderous intent in Duke Xing's eyes, which was not concealed at all. She struggled hard to get out of this predicament. Naturally, she wanted to survive. She couldn't die like this. Her daughter was going to be the empress. She would be the empress's biological mother and look down on all the madams with honorary titles. As her neck was loosened, Madame of Duke Xing gasped heavily. Her throat was burning with pain, and her chest felt as if it was being pricked by needles. But all this also made her know clearly that she was still alive and not dead. Tears fell down one by one. She tried to calm down and then looked up at Duke Xing, who was looking at her with a gloomy face. This was her husband, but now he just looked at her coldly and felt sad. Even her sadness just now was caused by him. She felt a tightness in her chest and a fishy taste in her throat. She spat out a mouthful of blood, which dripped on the clean carpet in front of her, and the plain carpet was immediately polluted. "Jiang Wanyan, do you think you are so smart that others don't know what you have done? You drugged yourself. You even got Nanny Xing killed." Duke Xing sneered as if he didn't see the blood on the corner of her mouth. "I had no choice. If I had a choice, would I do this? I drugged myself and hurt myself. Now I have hurt my body." Madame of Duke Xing burst into tears. She had pretended to cry in old Madame's yard before, but now she was really crying. She was full of grievances. "What good will it do for Ru-er if I enter the ancestral hall? Ru-er is going to enter the palace for the consort selection. If people know that her mother is locked in the ancestral hall, how will others think of her? How will the empress think of her? How can she get the position of the princess consort? I have to come out of the ancestral hall to help her, but you turned a blind eye to me. If I hadn't been forced to do this, how could I have done this to myself? Madame of Duke Xing cried and coughed. Blood was still dripping down the corners of her lips, which made her look extremely miserable. However, Duke Xing disliked her so much. They had been husband and wife for so many years, so how could he not know that Madame of Duke Xing was the best at pretending? He remembered that he had thought it was good to marry this cousin of his at that time, but now he was full of regret. No matter who he married at that time, it would be better than Madame of Duke Xing now. At least she would not drag him down. Why don't you die? If you die, or may have a dead mother. He raised the corner of his mouth sarcastically. This smile made people feel cold, and Madame of Duke Xing's hair stood on end. She knew that Duke Xing was really angry. Even if she had some courage in the past, she did not dare to annoy him at this time. Duke, if I really die, I will not be able to attend the consort selection, and she will have to observe mourning for me for 3 years. If it weren't for Ru, I would be willing to die. Madame of Duke Xing cried. What she said was the truth. If she died at this time, both of her children would have to observe mourning. Now was different from the past. No one knew what would happen if they missed the 3 years. You're on your own. Duke Xing knew that what she said was right, but seeing that she was getting angrier, he flicked his sleeves, turned around, and strode out, ignoring Madame of Duke Xing, who was lying on the ground and covered with blood. This matter not only caused the affairs of his own backyard, but also caused the people of the Ministry of Justice to come to ask about it. He had to take care of it, lest the people of the Ministry of Justice find out other things in his mansion. Guards, are they all dead? Hurry up and come in. After Duke Xing left, Madame of Duke Xing's hysterical scream came from the main room, which scared the maids and old maids outside and made them look at each other, not daring to go in for a while. In the end, 2 of the most trusted servant girls carefully walked in. The red plum blossoms in the yard were in good shape. Xiao Wanru asked Yujie to carry an empty high-necked beauty vase to the garden and wanted to put some beautiful red plum blossoms in it. However, she didn't see anything satisfactory along the way. Fortunately, there were no other people appreciating the plum blossoms at this time. Xiao Wanru wandered freely among the plum trees and looked at the plum blossoms she had chosen from different angles. When she felt that all the plum blossoms were good, she picked them off. Up to now, she had only picked 2. After the incident of Madame of Duke Xing, it seemed that everyone in the mansion became quiet all of a sudden. Nanny she hadn't come back yet. She should have been left in the Imperial Palace by the Empress. Without an etiquette instructor, the misses stayed in their own courtyards. After such a big incident, no one was in the mood to go out for a stroll in the garden. Xiao Wanru benefited from this. She really didn't want to see Xiao Yanru's hypocritical face. Xiao Yanru always put on a hypocritical face, which made people feel uncomfortable and spoiled her good mood. Miss, can't you find out what happened to Nanny Xing? Seeing that Xiao Wanru was really focused on picking plum blossoms, Yujie finally couldn't bear it anymore after a while. Of course we can find out something, but I don't know how much we can find out. Xiao Wanru said leisurely. What she could do was to lead people to the Imperial Palace. What would happen in the Imperial Palace next was out of her control. What will happen? Yujie said uneasily. What will happen? I heard that she is seriously ill. Several doctors have been invited to treat her, and even the imperial physicians in the Imperial Palace have been alarmed. Xiao Wanru said unhurriedly. Since the imperial physicians in the Imperial Palace had been alarmed, it meant that Madame of Duke Xing was not pretending this time. Will they find out that it was she who did it? They will find out, but the person who found it knows about it. But it will be difficult for her to recover now. Xiao Wanru said with a slight smile and tiptoed to pick a plum blossom she liked. Although the poison was slow-acting and had been discovered early, Madame of Duke Xing couldn't give her too much of it. However, the poison was actually very potent, so it was not easy to diagnose and treat. Otherwise, it would not have been used in the Imperial Palace at that time. She picked the plum blossom and looked around. As expected, it was not bad. She turned around and inserted it into the vase in Yujie's hand. Suddenly, A figure flashed across her eyes. She turned her head again and looked at the pavilion in the depths of the plum blossom forest. There was someone there? And he was still looking at her just now. Chapter 731. The plum blossom forest of Duke Xing's mansion was actually not big. The pavilion was on the other side of the plum blossom forest, which was a little far from where she had just come in. In the middle of winter, there was a curtain hanging outside, facing them. The curtain was slightly raised, and someone was standing in the pavilion. They couldn't see who it was, but one thing was for sure, that person seemed to be walking in their direction. "Miss, there seems to be someone over there." Yu Jie also found the person in the pavilion over there. Although she couldn't see his face, she could be sure that he was a man because she could see his dark robe. "Let's go." Xiao Wanru shook her head and motioned her not to look. No matter who the person over there was, since he was a man, it was not very convenient. "Okay." Yu Jie nodded and followed Xiao Wanru with the vase in her arms. They walked back together and then disappeared behind the plum blossom forest. When Shichi looked at Xiao Wanru's back through the gauze curtain, after a long while, he reached out and rubbed his eyebrows, feeling very uncomfortable. He couldn't describe the feeling. He came to Duke Xing's mansion today for routine business, mainly to ask about the poisoning of Madame of Duke Xing. Because it was related to a matter in the Imperial palace of the late emperor, the emperor asked him to come over and have a look. He didn't officially go to the Ministry of Justice to file a record. The poisoning of a madam of a noble family seemed to be more like a matter in the backyard. However, because the poison was a little special, it would be best if he could find out something. It didn't matter if he couldn't find anything. After all, it happened during the late emperor's reign. The imperial harem at that time was not the imperial harem of the current emperor. Because when Shichi lived next door to Duke Xing's mansion, the officials of the Ministry of Justice asked him to go there. He first visited Madame of Duke Xing and asked a few questions. Xiao Huangyan, the first young master of Duke Xing's mansion, took him to the courtyard. After walking for a while, a servant suddenly came over and whispered a few words to Xiao Hua, and apologized to him and asked him to wait for a while before going out. There happened to be a pavilion in front of him. He stood in the pavilion and admired the scenery of the plum blossom forest. He didn't expect to see Xiao Wanru appear in the plum blossom forest with her servant girl. He silently watched Xiao Wanru look around under the plum blossom tree to find a suitable plum blossom branch, and saw her talking to the servant girl beside her from time to time. Although he couldn't hear what they were talking about from a distance, he could tell that she seemed to be in a good mood. Her usually cold face was smiling from time to time. The young girl with exquisite facial features stood in the middle of the plum blossom forest, but the entire plum blossom forest became the background behind her. She was more beautiful than a flower. When Shichi had always disdained to use sentences from books to describe women, but now he inexplicably felt that the vocabulary he had learned was too few. No matter how many beautiful words there were, they could not compare to the beautiful scenery under the tree in front of him, as if there was such a scene in the depths of his memory. Xiao Hua, who walked among the blossom branch, saw Xing, and looked back occasionally. Blossoms Hua. Which Xing's heart? He reached out and pressed his chest. His heart was beating much faster than usual, but he couldn't explain why. He felt a little annoyed. He had a vague feeling that he couldn't control it, which made him feel extremely uncomfortable. The poisoning of Madame of Duke Xing, disappeared silently in the end, as if nothing had happened. Occasionally, someone heard the news, but they only said that Madame of Duke Xing seemed to be poisoned by someone, and it was a kind of poison that had been used in the palace. Madame of Duke Xing was fine, but she was not in good health. She disliked the noise in Duke Xing's mansion, so she took a few servant girls to the Yuhui nunnery to live for a period of time to recuperate. As for Nanny Xing's death, who would care how an old maid died and what crime she was charged with? The people from the Ministry of Justice also came to ask about it, but they only asked about it. There was no victim and no one felt wronged. This matter was just a formality, and it was not filed with the Ministry of Justice, nor was it recorded. It was almost peaceful outside the palace. Even if Madame of Duke Xing went to the Yuhui nunnery to recuperate, she didn't disturb others. She got up early, and even the shops on the street were not open. But some people said that they saw Madame of Duke Xing's carriage. It was so simple that it didn't look like the carriage of a Madame of Duke Xing. It looked like the most common oil-walled carriage in an aristocratic family. If they hadn't heard that Madame of Duke Xing left early in the morning, no one would have thought that Madame of Duke Xing was sitting in the carriage. However, there was another saying that Madame of Duke Xing was in poor health. This time, she went up the mountain to recuperate quietly and avoid noise. Naturally, she couldn't go forward in a big carriage, which would disturb others and herself. Duke Xing's mansion was completely quiet because of Madame of Duke Xing's trip, but the palace was not quiet. Honored consort Shu was dead, and she committed suicide by drowning herself. It was said that she couldn't get over it, but there was no news from the palace about why she couldn't get over it. Honored consort Shu's family was only allowed to go in and have a look. After that, the emperor and the empress both rewarded them, and then there was no news. Honored consort Shu originally had no children, and now she was not favored. In addition, her paternal family originally did not have any power. Although her position was not low, the fact that she had no children and no favor caused her to be neglected in the palace. Even the new favored concubine did not pay much attention to her. Honored consort Shu could be regarded as an old servant of the emperor when he was in the emperor's mansion. She committed suicide inexplicably, and the emperor couldn't find anything after investigating. Although some ministers submitted a memorial to the empress to investigate again and proposed to invite all the people in the harem to investigate carefully one by one, the emperor rebuked them angrily. His harem didn't need the idle ministers to keep an eye on it. At this time, the Imperial Institute of Medicine sent a memorial, which could be considered a good explanation for Honored Consort Shu's death. The reason why Honored Consort Shu didn't want to live was that Honored Consort Shu had a hidden disease that couldn't be cured. She was in a bad mood and was depressed. On the day of the accident, she had a quarrel with another concubine who had just entered the palace. She couldn't get over it, so she committed suicide by drowning herself. The Imperial Institute of Medicine's memorial immediately made the whole imperial court quiet, and no one stared at the emperor's harem anymore. The concubine in the harem was sick all year round, depressed, quarreled with the arrogant new concubine, and had an accident. This kind of thing happened in all dynasties, and there was no way to investigate it. However, the new concubine didn't have a good time and was directly put into the cold palace by the empress. She had just entered the palace, but she treated the old concubine in the palace so arrogantly. Moreover, she was a high-ranking concubine, which was originally rebellious. All these things were passed to Xiao Wanru through Qing. Of course, Qing deliberately said in the end that Consort Shu had an accident. The reason why Consort Shu had an accident was that the poisonous powder in the hands of Madame of Duke Xing was obtained from her. It was said that the emperor personally asked about this matter, and later the empress ordered someone to give her 3 feet of white silk. As for why this matter was found to be related to Honored Consort Shu, Qing didn't know. She felt that someone must have done something. As for Honored Consort Shu's death, Xiao Wanru laughed it off. Although she didn't pay much attention to Honored Consort Shu, she had plotted against her twice with Duke Xing's mansion, so she really didn't like her. Did she really think that she was invincible in the harem when she stirred up trouble like this? Now she had reaped what she had sown. In her last life, she had never seen Honored Consort Shu in the palace. She thought that Honored Consort Shu should have had an accident before she entered the palace. It was normal for Honored Consort Shu to seek her own death because she was so powerful and had no background. As for Madame of Duke Xing, she was forced to go to the Yuhui nunnery, which was both expected and unexpected. Madame of Duke Xing thought that she could hide all the evidence from others by pushing it on Nanny Xing, but she couldn't hide it from Xiao Jing. Old Madame might have been deceived at that time. How could she not punish Madame of Duke Xing after she realized it? She directly sent the evidence to Madame of Duke Xing while Madame of Duke Xing was not in good health. This was originally an excuse used by the madams and misses of aristocratic families when they committed crimes. This time, Madam of Duke Xing failed to steal a chicken and lost a grain of rice. Miss, Nanny, she won't come back? It has been several days. Different from Qing, Yu Jie was concerned about another thing. She won't come back. Xiao Wenru shook her head and narrowed her eyes slightly. After such a thing happened, no matter how low-key Duke Xing's mansion was, many aristocratic families secretly guessed that if Nanny she came back at this time, she would definitely cause a lot of trouble for Duke Xing's mansion, which was not what the Empress and Duke Xing's mansion wanted to see. Duke Xing's mansion needed to keep a low profile now, and the Empress also wanted to be impartial. In the past, when no one paid special attention to Duke Xing's mansion, she could privately send her nanny to give special treatment to the miss of Duke Xing's mansion and even suppress Xiao Wenru. At this time, everyone's attention fell on Duke Xing's mansion, so the Empress would not interfere anymore. That's great. You don't have to learn from her from morning to night in the future. Miss has learned the rules very well. Yu Jie was very happy. She really thought that Miss had nothing to learn from Nanny Shi. Miss had learned the rules very well, so Nanny Shi couldn't find fault with Miss no matter how picky she was. Xiao Wenru smiled faintly but didn't say anything. There was never the best in the Imperial Palace, only better. Moreover, no matter how well you learned the rules, if someone found fault with you and said that you didn't learn well, could you still argue with the people in the Imperial Palace? If you argued with them, you would be insensible and even be punished. She remembered that she had been punished because of improper salutation. Under the hot sun, Xiao Yenru sent someone to make her bow sideways until she couldn't stand and fainted. Xiao Yenru also asked her to apologize to Xiao Yenru the next day. The Imperial Palace had never been a place of reason. The winter this year was so cold that Xiao Wenru didn't want to go out. Fortunately, the whole Duke Xing's mansion seemed to be extremely quiet this year. Everyone seemed to want to have a peaceful new year and didn't intend to make trouble. Although it was the first time for the third madam to take charge of the affairs of Duke Xing's mansion, it was basically in good order. As for the absence of Madam of Duke Xing, everyone gradually accepted it. They only said that Madame of Duke Xing was in poor health now and it was of great benefit to her to recuperate in the Yuhui nunnery. Naturally, they couldn't let her work too hard. As soon as the new year arrived, the draft was launched. Originally, it had been prepared early. As long as the candidates entered the Imperial Palace according to the list, it would be fine. Because there were 4 misses in Duke Xing's mansion who were going to enter the Imperial Palace for the draft, the originally desolate mansion became lively. Old Madam would reward them from time to time, and she would also invite people from the garment workshops outside to enter the mansion directly to sew a few more sets of fitting clothes for the misses who were going to enter the Imperial Palace. On the 6th day of the first lunar month, when everyone was still visiting relatives, the candidates officially entered the Imperial Palace. Chapter 732. On the wide official road, the carriages all went to the palace gate one after another. There was an inspection at the palace gate, so the carriages moving in the direction of the palace gate moved very slowly. One end had reached the palace gate, while the other end was still on the street. Many people watched the bustle on both sides of the street. Seeing the carriages with the marks of their respective aristocratic families passing by, they pointed at them and talked. Duke Xing's mansion was the one who talked the most. On the one hand, it was because the first miss of Duke Xing's mansion had faintly become the first beauty. On the other hand, it was also because Duke Xing's mansion had been troubled recently and had a close relationship with the Yuhui nunnery outside the city. At first, it was the first Miss Xiao, then it was the 5th Miss Xiao, and now it was Madam of Duke Xing. No matter how they looked at it, there was something wrong. However, some things were too confidential. Under the suppression of several parties, ordinary people did not know. But this did not hinder the enthusiasm of the common people to watch the bustle. They all wanted to guess how beautiful the first miss of Duke Xing's mansion was. This time, she would definitely fall in love with the royal family, but they did not know which prince's mansion she would fall in love with. It was said that the first Miss Xiao was extremely beautiful. How could such a beauty not fall in love with the royal family? The carriage moved slowly. Xiao Wenru leaned against the side of the carriage with her eyes closed and was sleepy. She was called up early this morning, and now she felt sleepy because she had nothing to do. The misses of aristocratic families who participated in the draft took 1 carriage each. Duke Xing's mansion sent 4 carriages, and they entered the team according to their ranks. She was the last carriage of Duke Xing's mansion. At this time, the speed of the carriage was extremely slow. The window was hung with a light gauze curtain and a half-hung brocade curtain. The sound came from the outside and could be heard clearly. In particular, some loud voices were almost in the ears. Someone recognized the mark of Duke Xing's mansion and deliberately squeezed over to have a look. The reputation of the first beauty was well known. It was a blessing to see such a beauty. Therefore, more people crowded around their carriages and talked. Everyone wanted to see the first Miss Xiao, who was said to be extremely beautiful. Someone guessed that the carriage in the front should be the first Mrs., so there were the most people on her side. The carriages passed by one, attracting the crowd to watch. But in the end, they stopped at the intersection outside the palace gate. That section of the road was not allowed to watch the bustle, and there were no shops on both sides. At this section of the road, the voices of the idle people on both sides completely disappeared. Then he slowly entered the palace. From the time they left home in the morning, 4 hours had passed by the time they arrived at the palace gate. Originally, it would only take them about an hour to reach the palace gate. Finally, the carriage entered the palace gate and stopped in the parking lot according to the regulations. One miss after another appeared at the door of the carriage with a maid. Xiao Wanru brought Yujie. A soft sedan chair was already waiting there. After the young ladies boarded the sedan chair, 2 eunuchs carried them into the depths of the palace. Xiao Wanru was not sleepy at this time. She half lifted the curtain and looked outside. After looking for a while, she felt that the scenery in front of her was familiar. In her last life, although she was not a candidate for the consort selection in the palace, the candidates often came here. It was time to arrive at the palace where the candidates lived. Finally, the sedan chair stopped, and Yujie stepped forward to help Xiao Wanru out. Xiao Wanru had been sitting in either a carriage or a sedan chair along the way, and her whole body felt soft. Xiao Wanru stood still with the help of Yujie and narrowed her eyes to look around. It was indeed the palace where the consort selection had taken place. In fact, this area was not a palace. There was a place for the candidates to live in the palace, called Chushio Palace, which was composed of several different palaces. Although it was only a palace name, there were many small courtyards in it, and the houses were stacked one after another. It had always been the place where the consort selection took place. Most of the S in the palace entered the palace through this way of consort selection. Of course, this also meant that the princes' marriages were also like this. The main purpose of this consort selection was the marriages of the princes. It was the right time for the princes to get married at this time. The royal family had never married too early. When the consort selection took place 3 years ago, it was only said that the princes would get married first, but it was not said that they would get married. Now that the consort selection had taken place, there should be almost no more changes. 3rd sister, 4th sister, 5th sister, let's go together. Xiao Yinru came over and said softly. Duke Xing's mansion regarded her as the eldest, so it should be like this. The few of them nodded and followed behind her, waiting for their accommodations to be arranged. Xiao Yinru knew a lot of misses from aristocratic families. Although it was inconvenient to talk loudly at this time, they nodded and smiled at each other a lot. However, although their smiles were decent, they were not affectionate. Compared with Xiao Yinru, the most popular candidate selected, how could her competitors really be affectionate with her? Xiao Yinru smiled very appropriately. She led her sisters from Duke Xing's mansion to walk inside under the guidance of the palace maid. She took the number plate from a supervisor nanny and looked at the numbers on everyone's number plates. As expected, they were connected. A eunuch had been waiting by the side. Seeing that they had taken the number plate, he led them inside. It didn't take long for them to arrive at their rooms, which were relatively close to the gate of Chushio Palace. Such a residence was usually only available to the families of the real rich and powerful. It was convenient and well known. There happened to be 4 rooms in their row. Xiao Yanru chose the outermost room, and so on. Xiao Wanru chose the innermost room. They were a little tired and entered their rooms respectively. Xiao Wanru took Yujie to push open the slightly closed door and found that although there was only one room, it was divided into the outer room and the inner room, separated by a fourfold screen. "Miss, how many rooms are there if they live like this?" Yujie looked inside and said in surprise. Not only was the room larger than she had imagined, but the decoration inside was also good. At first glance, she could tell that it was carefully decorated. When she stood outside the door just now, she also looked around and found that there were so many beauties living like this. It seemed that it was not enough. Just like the front room, the rooms in the back can be shared by 2 people or 4 people. Xiao Wanru walked in and said with a faint smile. In her last life, she had done paintings for the beauties. It should be the beauties of the generation 3 years later, so she knew a little about the affairs of the beauties. The high-status beauties were placed in a room closer to the main entrance, and the space was large, so one person could have one room. The lower-status beauties were placed in a room for 2 people, and the lowest was for 4 people. The misses of aristocratic families in the capital were also divided into 3, 6, and 9 ranks. But there would be another batch of people. Nanny she had told them before that the scale of the draft this time was large and even more. She implied that it was not only for the princes but also for some people in the imperial harem. Of course, Nanny Shi's words were vague, but Xiao Wanru had already understood the meaning. It seemed that not only the prince's legal wives and concubines would be selected this time, but also the S. In her last life, Xiao Yanru should have entered the imperial palace at this time, right? She didn't know why Xiao Yanru, who was full of confidence at that time, entered the imperial palace instead of the prince's mansion. In her last life, Xiao Yanru had a better reputation than in this life, and Duke Xing's mansion was also more prosperous. However, although she was favored in the imperial palace, she didn't get a high position. The position of Zhaoyi was not a high ranking. Could it be that there was something else that she didn't know? In this case, she would temporarily be a bystander in this life and see whether Xiao Yanru entered the imperial palace according to the rules in the last life or the prince's mansion she wanted to enter. After making up her mind, Xiao Wanru was not in the mood to have lunch and slept for a while. The room was very clean, so Yujie didn't need to clean it up. Lunch was also sent over by a specific little eunuch. After eating, it was placed at the door, and a little eunuch would come to collect it. It was very convenient. In the afternoon, the nanny in charge of Chushio Palace asked all the beauties to gather. Xiao Wanru had just woken up, dressed up in a hurry, and left Yujie in the room. She followed the palace maid who led the way and went out with Xiao Yanru and the others. At this time, they couldn't take the servant girl with them. In the garden, the nanny in charge of Chushio Palace kept a stern face, waiting for the beauties who came late, and scolded the last few. Xiao Wanru was one of the early ones. It was more cost-effective to live near than to live far away. She also saw that the few who were scolded lived far away. Although they were sweating profusely, they were still a little late. When all the beauties arrived, they were asked to line up in 5 lines and enter the room one by one. Xiao Wanru lowered her head and took a deep breath with her face turning slightly red. Although she had also participated in the talent show in her last life, she was just an outsider. Now it was her turn. Although others didn't know what they were checking, Xiao Wanru knew that about half of them had to pass this test. They checked whether there were diseases or scars on the bodies of the beauties. Those who were not good-looking were not allowed to pass this test. There were fewer people in front of them. Originally, Xiao Wanru stood in the front, so it was her turn after a few people. Xiao Wanru suppressed the panic in her heart, took a deep breath, and followed a palace maid into the room. There was only an extremely old nanny in charge in the room. Her slightly chubby face showed a bit of sternness. At first glance, she could tell that she was not a person who was easy to get along with. After entering the room, the door was closed. The window had already been closed, and the curtain was drawn. There were lights and heaters inside. When she entered the room, she immediately felt very warm, as if it were a different season from the weather outside. The palace maid had left, and Xiao Wanru couldn't help breathing quickly. Even though she had been reborn, She had never undressed in front of others. "Come here, undress," the nanny said in a cold voice as if it was routine. Xiao Wanru gritted her teeth. She had to pass this test. She tried hard to overcome the obstacles in her heart, took 2 steps forward, and put her fingers on the edge of her clothes. Her fingers trembled. She knew that this test was to be undressed and checked, which was also the most embarrassing scene for the beauties in the talent show. "Hurry up," the nanny said impatiently. "Wait a minute. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.